Tonight, we will explore 10 teachings about the shadows that follow our choices. In the quiet spaces between action and consequence, between intention and result, wisdom waits to be discovered. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply rest here as we journey together through stories that reveal how our deepest lessons often come wrapped in our most difficult experiences. If this path of gentle learning calls to you, I invite you to subscribe and join us regularly as we discover the Buddha's teachings through the ancient art of storytelling. These tales have traveled across centuries, carried by countless voices, each one a lamp lighting the way toward greater understanding. The stories we will share tonight speak of choices made in shadow, of the weight that follows when we turn away from wisdom's voice. We will meet 10 souls whose struggles mirror our own, whose mistakes become our teachers, whose redemption offers hope for all who have walked similar paths. Through their experiences, we discover that even our greatest errors can become doorways to profound awakening. Let us begin this journey together, breathing gently into this moment, allowing our hearts to open to both the darkness and light that live within every human story. Take a breath now. Feel the air moving naturally in and out of your body. There is nowhere else you need to be. This moment is enough. Let us explore the story of Veer, the iron smelter whose hands could transform the earth itself, but who lost sight of what truly matters in life. In a valley where red earth met granite cliffs, there lived an iron smelter named Veer, whose skill was known throughout the mountain regions. His forge burned day and night, and the sound of his hammer striking heated metal rang across the valley like a heartbeat. Veer had learned the ancient craft from his father, who had learned from his father before him, and each generation had added their wisdom to the sacred knowledge of transforming raw ore into tools that sustained life. Veer worked with a precision that came from decades of practice. He could read the color of flame like others read words on a page. When the iron glowed cherry red, he knew it was ready for the first shaping. When it shifted to orange yellow, the time had come for detailed work. His hands moved without conscious thought, guided by knowledge that lived in his muscles and bones. The villagers respected Veer's craft and depended on his work. Farmers brought bent plowshares to be straightened, their edges sharpened for another season of breaking soil. Women carried worn cooking pots to be mended, holes sealed with expert skill. Children watched wide-eyed as sparks flew from his anvil, iron taking new form under his patient hands. Veer took pride in this work, in the way raw earth could become something useful, something that served life. Each piece that left his forge carried a small part of his attention, his care for the community that sustained his family. His wife Kamala would bring him meals at midday, and he would set down his hammer to eat beside her, watching their 2 young sons play in the shade of the great oak that grew beside their home. These were good days, full days, days when the rhythm of work matched the rhythm of life itself. But everything changed the morning Veer discovered the hidden vein of ore. He had been walking the mountain paths before dawn, as was his custom, searching for surface iron that erosion had revealed. The morning light caught something unusual in a rocky outcrop, a dark gleam that made him stop and look more closely. When he cleared away the loose stones and scraped at the earth with his knife, his heart began to race. The vein of ore was richer than anything he had ever seen, purer than the metal that came from established mines, deeper than he could measure with his eyes. In that moment, standing alone on the mountainside with the valley spread below him, Veer felt something shift inside his chest. The quiet satisfaction of his daily work suddenly seemed small compared to what this discovery might bring. He spent that entire day examining the deposit, his mind calculating its potential value. By evening, he had convinced himself that this was fortune beyond his wildest dreams. He could sell this ore to traders from the distant cities, men who paid 10 times what local customers offered. His family would never know want again. His sons would inherit wealth instead of just skill. But first, he would need to extract it all, every grain of precious metal, before anyone else discovered what he had found. That night, he told Kamala he had found a new source of ore, but he did not mention its richness or his growing plans. Something made him hold back the full truth, though he could not name what held his tongue. She smiled and said she was glad for their good fortune, then asked if this meant he might have more time at home with their boys. Soon, he told her. Once I've finished this work, we'll have all the time we need. The next morning, Veer began mining the secret vein. At first, he maintained his regular schedule, working the hidden deposit only in the early morning hours before his normal forge work began. But the ore was so pure, so valuable, that he found himself waking earlier and earlier, staying longer at the mountainside excavation. The pile of extracted metal grew daily, and with it, his vision of the wealth it would bring. Within a month, he had hired a cart to take his first load to the city markets. The price the traders paid exceeded even his highest hopes. That night, he counted the coins again and again, their weight solid in his palms, their promise gleaming in the lamplight. He hid the money beneath a loose floorboard and began planning his next extraction. But the work was demanding. The vein ran deep into the mountain, requiring him to dig narrow tunnels, to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for his shoulders. His hands, hardened by years at the forge, began to crack and bleed from the constant scraping against rock. His back ached from crouching in low spaces. His clothes were permanently stained with red earth and stone dust. Still, every ounce of ore he pulled from the mountain represented wealth beyond anything his family had ever known. How could he stop when fortune lay within his grasp? He began rising at midnight to work by torchlight, returning home just as the sun cleared the mountain peaks. During the day, he tried to maintain his regular smithing, but his movements became mechanical, his attention divided. Customers noticed that his work, while still technically sound, lacked the careful attention it had once received. Some began taking their repairs to smiths in neighboring villages. Kamala watched her husband's transformation with growing concern. His eyes, which had once held warmth and presence, now seemed to look through her towards something she could not see. When she spoke to him, he would nod and make appropriate responses, but she sensed he was not truly listening. At meals, he ate quickly and distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. "The boys miss spending time with you," she told him one evening as he prepared to leave for his secret work. "They ask why Papa is always busy now." Veer paused at the door, his hand on the wooden handle his grandfather had carved. For a moment, he almost turned back, almost sat down at the table where his family waited. But then he thought of the unexplored sections of the vein, of the wealth that might slip away if he delayed, of the traders who would pay such good prices for his ore. "Just a little longer," he said. "Once this work is finished, everything will be different. Better." Kamala nodded, but he had already turned away and did not see the sadness that passed across her face like a shadow. Months passed in this pattern. Veer's secret hoard of coins grew heavier, requiring a larger hiding place than another. His body grew thinner despite the wealth he was accumulating, His hair, prematurely streaked with gray, hung lank around a face that had lost its former fullness. His hands, once steady and sure, developed a slight tremor from exhaustion and constant strain. The vein seemed inexhaustible. Each day's digging revealed more ore, richer deposits, deeper veins that branched into unexplored passages. Veer began to fear that if he rested even for a single day, someone else might discover his secret and claim what he had worked so hard to uncover. This fear drove him to work longer hours, to push his body beyond its limits, to sacrifice sleep and meals and time with his family for just a few more hours of extraction. His forge grew cold more often than it burned. Old customers stopped coming, knowing they could not rely on his availability. New customers learned to seek other smiths whose attention remained focused on the work at hand. The sound of hammer on anvil, which had once marked the rhythm of the valley's days, fell silent for longer and longer periods. Veer barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the mountain tunnel, the gleam of ore in torchlight, the weight of coins in his hidden stores. Everything else, his wife's worried glances, his children's disappointed faces when he missed their bedtime once again, the way his neighbors had begun to avoid conversation with him. All of this faded into background noise against the compelling song of accumulating wealth. One evening, as autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and red, Veer's younger son brought him a small wooden horse he had carved with a knife his father had made for him the previous year. "I made this for you, Papa," the boy said, holding up the rough but recognizable figure. "See, it has 4 legs and a tail and everything." Veer took the carving and examined it briefly, his mind already calculating how much ore he could extract in the hours remaining before dawn. The horse was crude, but showed promise, evidence of his son's growing skill and attention to craft. Any father would have treasured such a gift, would have sat with his child to admire the work and offer encouragement. "Very nice," Veer said, setting the wooden horse on a shelf without really looking at it. "I have to go now. We'll talk about it tomorrow." The boy's face fell, but Veer had already gathered his tools and headed toward the door. He did not see his son carefully take the horse down from the shelf, hold it for a moment, then place it gently in a box with other forgotten treasures. That night, working alone in his tunnel by flickering torchlight, Veer felt a strange emptiness that had nothing to do with hunger, though he had forgotten to eat dinner again. The feeling followed him through his work, a hollow ache that the gleam of fresh ore could not fill. He told himself it was merely fatigue, that once he had extracted enough wealth to secure his family's future, this strange sadness would disappear. He did not know that his body had begun to fail him in ways that coins could not repair. Winter came early that year, bringing cold that seeped into the mountain tunnels and made the work of extraction even more difficult. Veer's breath misted in the frigid air as he worked, and his hands grew so stiff with cold that he could barely grip his tools. Still, he continued, driven by a compulsion that had grown stronger than reason, stronger than comfort, stronger than the love he bore for his family. The ore was endless, it seemed. Each day brought new discoveries, richer veins, deeper possibilities. How could he stop when such wealth lay within reach? How could he rest when fortune waited in the darkness of the mountain? His wife Kamala no longer asked when he would be home. His sons had learned not to wait for him at evening meals. The rhythm of the household had adjusted itself around his absence, life flowing around the empty space where a father and husband used to be. But the coins continued to accumulate, hidden in secret caches throughout his house and property, more wealth than his grandfather could have imagined. more money than his father had seen in a lifetime of honest work. Surely, Veer told himself, this sacrifice would prove worthwhile. Surely his family would understand when they discovered how rich he had made them. He did not notice that wealth without presence is merely a beautiful cage, that accumulation without sharing becomes a burden rather than a blessing, that the very thing he thought he was providing for his family, security, comfort, a prosperous future, was being destroyed by the means he used to obtain it. The mountain held more ore than he could extract in 10 lifetimes, but Veer had only one lifetime, and it was burning away like a candle in the darkness of the tunnels, consumed by the very fire of ambition that he thought would light his family's way to a better future. Spring returned to the valley, bringing warmth and new growth. But Veer barely noticed the changing seasons. His world had shrunk to the narrow confines of his excavation, his vision limited to the gleam of ore in the torchlight, his thoughts consumed by calculations of wealth and the fear that someone might discover his secret before he could extract every last grain of precious metal from the earth. He worked now with a desperation that bordered on madness, sleeping only when exhaustion forced him to collapse, eating only when hunger became a physical pain he could not ignore. His body, pushed beyond all reasonable limits, began to show signs of the toll such relentless labor exacted. His hands, once steady enough to shape the finest metalwork, shook constantly. His breathing, labored for months in the dusty confines of the tunnels, came in short gasps that left him dizzy. His heart, strained by the constant physical exertion and the weight of his secret obsession, beat irregularly, sometimes racing, sometimes seeming to pause entirely. But still the ore called to him from the depths of the mountain. Still the vision of ultimate wealth drove him forward. Still the fear of leaving any treasure undiscovered compelled him to continue his relentless extraction. Rest here for a moment. Notice your breath moving naturally, easily, without effort or strain. Feel your body supported, held by the earth beneath you. There is nothing you need to dig for, nothing you need to extract or accumulate. Simply be here, breathing. Present to this moment that asks nothing of you but your gentle attention. Let us continue with Veer's story and see where his choices have led him. On a morning when summer heat shimmered above the valley and birds sang in the oak tree beside his house, Veer collapsed in his tunnel. His body, pushed beyond all endurance, simply refused to carry him further into the mountain's depths. He lay on the cool stone floor, his tools scattered around him, and for the first time in over a year, he was still. In that stillness, something he had not felt for months began to surface. A memory of his son's wooden horse, of his wife's worried face, of the satisfaction he had once found in creating useful things rather than simply extracting valuable ones. But these memories felt distant now, like scenes from someone else's life, overwhelmed by the immediate presence of the ore that surrounded him and the fortune that still waited to be claimed. With tremendous effort, he pulled himself upright and resumed his digging. But his movements were slower now, less coordinated. His vision blurred periodically, and he had to stop frequently to catch his breath. Still, he could not bear the thought of leaving the mountain while wealth remained unharvested. That evening, he did not return home at his usual late hour. Kamala waited through the night, pacing between the window and the door, her worry growing with each hour that passed. Their sons woke to find their mother keeping vigil, her eyes red from tears she tried to hide. "Where is Papa?" the younger boy asked, clutching his forgotten wooden horse. "He's working," Kamala said, though her voice carried little conviction. "He'll be home soon." But morning came without Veer's return. Kamala gathered several neighbors, and together they searched the mountain paths, calling his name, following the faint traces of his secretive journeys. It was midday when they found the narrow entrance to his hidden excavation, marked by the scattered debris of months of digging. They called into the darkness, and a weak voice answered from deep within the mountain. It took 3 men with ropes and torches to bring Veer out of the tunnel system he had carved, and when they finally pulled him into sunlight, they were shocked by what they saw. The man they remembered, robust, skilled, present in his life, had been replaced by someone gaunt and hollow-eyed, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that seemed to have forgotten how to stand upright. His hands, once capable of the finest metalwork, trembled constantly, and his breathing came in short, painful gasps. But perhaps most disturbing of all was his reaction to being brought out of the mountain. Even in his weakened state, even after collapsing from exhaustion, Veer struggled against his rescuers, begging them to let him return to his work. "The ore," he whispered repeatedly. "I haven't finished with the ore." They carried him home and placed him in the bed he had rarely used for over a year. Kamala sent for the village healer, an old woman whose knowledge of herbs and bodies ran deep as mountain springs. She examined Veer with practiced hands, feeling his irregular pulse, listening to his labored breathing, noting the way his eyes seemed to focus on something none of them could see. "His body is worn out," she told Kamala quietly, "like a tool used beyond its purpose, ground down to nothing by too much work and too little rest. I can give him herbs for the pain, but the damage goes too deep for healing." That night, as Veer lay between clean sheets in his own house for the first time in months, he dreamed of the mountain tunnel, of veins of ore that stretched endlessly into darkness, of wealth that waited just beyond his reach. Even in sleep, his hands moved as if digging, as if he could somehow continue his extraction through pure will. His family gathered around his bed, Kamala and their 2 sons, his brother, who had rushed from the next valley when he received word, neighbors who remembered the man Veer had been before his obsession consumed him. They spoke to him of love, of memories they cherished, of the legacy of skill and kindness he had once embodied. But Veer's responses were scattered, distracted. His attention kept drifting to the window that faced the mountain, to calculations of how much ore remained unclaimed, to regrets about time lost to weakness when he could have been working. The wealth he had accumulated, hidden in secret places throughout his property, seemed less important now than the wealth he had not yet extracted. "The money," he whispered to Kamala during one of his more lucid moments, "under the floorboards, behind the loose stone in the wall, buried beneath the apple tree. I did this for you, for the boys. We're rich now." Kamala squeezed his hand, her tears falling on their joined fingers. "We never needed to be rich," she said. "We needed you to be here." But Veer had already turned back toward the window, his eyes searching the mountainside for signs of the excavation he would never complete. As his body weakened further, as the healer's herbs provided less and less relief from his pain, Veer began to understand something that chilled him more than any mountain wind. All the wealth he had accumulated meant nothing if he was not alive to share it with those he loved. The coins hidden throughout his property were just metal discs without the presence, the attention, the time he had traded away to obtain them. In his final days, he asked his sons to bring him some clay and simple tools. With hands that shook but still remembered their skill, he began to shape small figures. A horse like the one his younger son had carved, a woman who resembled Kamala, tiny representations of the life he had abandoned in pursuit of wealth. "I'm sorry," he whispered as he worked. though whether he spoke to the clay figures or to his family, none of them could say. His brother sat beside the bed, watching Veer's trembling hands try to recapture something that had slipped away like water through fingers. The clay figures were crude, nothing like the fine metalwork Veer had once produced, but they carried an urgency, a desperate attempt to touch something real before it was too late. "Do you remember?" his brother said quietly. "When we were children, and you would make toys for the village children? You never charged for those pieces. You said the joy on their faces was payment enough." Veer's hands stilled for a moment. "I remember," he said, his voice barely audible. "I remember when the work was enough, when making something useful felt like enough." He died 3 days later, on a morning when summer rain drummed against the windows and the mountain disappeared behind sheets of gray water. His final words were not about love or family or the life he was leaving behind. Instead, he whispered something about ore that remained unclaimed, wealth that would be lost, work left unfinished in the dark tunnels of his obsession. The irony was not lost on those who attended his funeral. Veer had indeed accumulated great wealth, more money than most people in the valley would see in several lifetimes. But he had spent his final year as one of the poorest men alive, rich in coins but destitute of time, abundant in possessions but starving for presence, successful in accumulation but completely bankrupt in the currency of life itself. His hidden caches of money, when discovered and counted, represented a fortune that could have supported his family in comfort for generations. But the family that remained had been fractured by his absence, his sons growing up without a father's guidance, his wife aging alone while he pursued his solitary obsession in the mountain's depths. At the funeral, as neighbors spoke of the skilled craftsman Veer had once been and the tragedy of what he had become, an old monk who traveled through the valley stopped to pay his respects. He listened to the stories of Veer's life and death, of the wealth discovered and the life wasted, of the man who had everything and nothing. When invited to speak, the monk rose slowly and looked at the gathering with eyes that held deep compassion. "I knew Veer only through your words," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled mourners. "But his story is not uncommon in this world. He spent his life gathering what he couldn't take with him and lost the time he could have lived." The monk paused, letting his words settle into the silence that followed. "Wealth has its place in life," he continued. "Security, comfort, the ability to care for those we love. These are not evil things. But when the pursuit of wealth becomes more important than the life we're supposedly securing, when accumulation replaces presence, when we sacrifice the irreplaceable for the merely valuable, we become the poorest people on earth." He gestured toward the simple wooden box that held Veer's remains. This man discovered a great treasure in the mountain, but he already possessed an even greater treasure, a family who loved him, a skill that served his community, days that could have been filled with meaning and connection. He traded the invaluable for the valuable and found himself bankrupt in all the ways that matter most. Let us pause here and breathe together. Feel the rhythm of your own breath, steady and reliable, asking nothing of you but this moment's presence. Notice how your body rests without effort, how your heart beats without your conscious direction, how life flows through you like a gentle stream, requiring no extraction, no accumulation, simply your awareness and gratitude. The monk's words at Veer's funeral carried a teaching that rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. But perhaps the person most affected by his story was Veer's brother, Gopal. who had watched his siblings' transformation from skilled craftsman to obsessed accumulator, from present father to absent ghost haunting his own life. Gopal was also a metalworker, though he specialized in copper rather than iron, creating vessels and decorative pieces that graced homes throughout the region. He had his own forge, his own family, his own relationship with the ancient craft that had sustained their lineage for generations. And he had his own opportunities for wealth that went beyond the steady income of his regular work. In the weeks following Veer's death, as Gopal helped Kamala discover and count all the hidden money his brother had accumulated, he found himself thinking deeply about the path that had led to such a tragic end. The coins they unearthed were real enough. Good silver and gold that could purchase comfort, security, all the things a family might need. But they felt cold in his hands, lifeless compared to the warm copper he shaped each day at his own forge. One morning, as Gopal worked at his anvil, a stranger arrived at his forge, a well-dressed merchant from the distant capital who had heard of the brothers' reputation for fine metalwork. The man examined several of Gopal's pieces with the expert eye of someone who knew both craft and commerce. "Excellent work," the merchant said, running his fingers over the smooth curve of a water vessel, feeling the perfect balance of form and function. "I represent buyers in the capital who would pay premium prices for work of this quality, but they would want quantity as well as excellence, perhaps 50 pieces a month, delivered on schedule." The merchant named a price that made Gopal's eyes widen. It was more than he currently earned in 3 months of regular work, enough to transform his family's circumstances just as dramatically as Veer's mining had promised to do. "The demand is there," the merchant continued. "Rich families in the capital are decorating their homes with fine metalwork, and they're willing to pay well for authentic pieces. You could become quite wealthy if you're willing to increase your production." Gopal set down his hammer and looked around his forge, at the familiar tools that had belonged to his father, at the half-finished pieces that would serve local families, at the window through which he could see his children playing in the garden while his wife tended her vegetables. 50 pieces a month, he repeated slowly. "That would require me to work day and night," the merchant said cheerfully. "But the rewards would be substantial. In 2 years, you could afford to hire assistants. In 5 years, you could own the largest metalworking operation in this entire region." Gopal nodded, understanding the mathematics of the proposition. More work, more hours, more production, more money. It was a path he had seen his brother walk, though toward a different destination. The end result, wealth, security, success by any external measure, would be the same. "I appreciate your offer," Gopal said finally, "but I need some time to consider it." The merchant looked surprised. In his experience, craftsmen rarely hesitated when offered such profitable arrangements. "Of course," he said, "but don't wait too long. I have other artisans to visit, and this kind of opportunity doesn't remain available indefinitely." After the merchant left, Gopal continued his work, but his mind was divided between the copper taking shape under his hammer and the choice that lay before him. The promised wealth was real, the opportunity genuine. He could provide his family with luxuries they had never known, security beyond anything their modest income could offer. But he kept remembering Veer's trembling hands trying to shape clay figures in his final days, the desperate attempt to reconnect with something that had been lost in the pursuit of accumulation. He thought of his nephews, who barely knew their father, and of his sister-in-law Kamala, who had been widowed not by death, but by obsession long before Veer's actual passing. That evening, Gopal walked to the oak tree where his family often gathered for evening meals. His children were climbing among its branches, their laughter mixing with the sound of wind through leaves. His wife sat in the shade, mending a shirt, humming softly to herself. The scene was ordinary, unremarkable, worth nothing in the merchant's calculations of profit and loss, but sitting there as evening shadows lengthened across the valley, Gopal felt something his brother had lost sight of in his mountain tunnels: the profound wealth of presence, the irreplaceable treasure of time freely given, the abundance that flows not from accumulation, but from attention. His younger daughter climbed down from the tree and approached him, grass stains on her clothes, her hair tangled from play. "Papa," she said, settling herself on his lap, "will you tell us a story?" Gopal wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her small body, breathing the sweet scent of her hair. In that moment, he understood something that no amount of money could purchase. This child would only be this age once, would only fit in his lap for a brief span of years, would only ask for his stories for a short window of time that was already passing, like water through his fingers. "Once upon a time," he began, and as he spoke, he saw his choice clearly. When the merchant returned the next week, expecting an acceptance of his generous offer, Gopal was ready with his answer. "I'm honored by your proposal," he said, "but I've decided to continue working as I do now." The merchant frowned, clearly puzzled. "The income I'm offering would change your life. You could afford things you've never dreamed of owning." "Perhaps," Gopal said, "but I might lose things I can't dream of living without." He gestured toward his forge, where a half-completed piece waited for his attention. "I make enough to support my family comfortably," he continued. "My work serves the local community, people I know and care about. My children know their father. My wife has a husband who comes home each evening. My neighbors can depend on me to be present in their lives. These things have value that can't be measured in coins." The merchant shook his head, unable to understand why someone would choose sufficiency over abundance, presence over profit. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Opportunities like this don't come often. You'll regret this decision when you're old and still struggling to make ends meet." After the merchant left, Gopal returned to his work, but now each hammer blow carried a different rhythm. He was not just shaping copper, he was choosing a way of life, selecting what to value and what to sacrifice, deciding what kind of legacy to leave his children. This story shows us how the pursuit of wealth can become the pursuit of poverty when we lose sight of what makes life rich. Veer discovered that accumulating material treasure while sacrificing time, presence, and relationship is the greatest form of impoverishment. The Buddha taught that our deepest poverty comes not from having too little money, but from having too little life, too little presence, too little connection, too little awareness of what we already possess. When we mistake accumulation for abundance, when we trade irreplaceable moments for replaceable coins, we become wealthy in all the wrong currencies. True abundance flows from recognizing the treasure we already hold, the breath moving through our bodies, the people who love us, the simple capacity to be present in our own lives. Gopal's choice reminds us that enough is a decision, not a number. When we know what truly matters, we can choose presence over accumulation, relationship over wealth, being over having. This is not about rejecting material security, but about understanding that security built on the foundation of an unlived life is no security at all. Rest here for a moment. Feel the abundance of your own breath, the wealth of this present moment, the treasure of your awareness itself. There is nothing you need to accumulate to be complete. You are already rich beyond measure in all the ways that cannot be stolen, lost, or left behind. Let us explore another story, one that reveals how avoiding difficult truths can create consequences far more devastating than the truth we feared to face. In a kingdom where rivers carved green valleys between ancient hills, there lived a royal messenger named Akash, whose reputation for speed and reliability was known throughout the land. He could cover vast distances without tiring, navigate treacherous mountain passes in darkness, and deliver messages with perfect accuracy, even when the content was complex or urgent. Kings and merchants, generals and governors, all trusted Akash to carry their most important communications across the realm. Akash took deep pride in this work. Each message he carried represented someone's trust, and he understood that entire lives might depend on his faithfulness to the task. Love letters that would determine marriages, business agreements that would affect livelihoods, military orders that could save or doom entire communities. All of these passed through his hands and found their destinations because of his commitment to truth and reliability. He lived simply, but well, his reputation bringing steady income and the respect of those who knew the value of trustworthy service. His small house near the palace gates was filled with tokens of gratitude from satisfied customers. A silver cup from a merchant whose urgent message had saved a crucial trade agreement. A beautifully carved wooden box from a family whose son had been warned of danger just in time. A bolt of fine cloth from a general whose strategic communications had prevented unnecessary bloodshed. But Akash's greatest source of pride was not the gifts or the payment. It was the knowledge that his word could be trusted absolutely, that when he said he had delivered a message faithfully, everyone from peasant to king knew they could rely on his honesty. In a world where truth was often bent to serve convenience or comfort, Akash stood as a pillar of absolute reliability. This reputation made him the natural choice when the most difficult message of his career arrived. The kingdom was at war with a neighboring realm, a conflict that had dragged on for 2 bitter years with victories and defeats on both sides. The king, confident in his armies and generals, had grown accustomed to receiving reports of successful battles, strategic advantages gained, enemy forces defeated or scattered. These messages allowed him to plan his next moves from a position of strength, to allocate resources with confidence, to reassure his people that their sacrifices were leading toward ultimate victory. On a morning when autumn mist clung to the valley floors and the first frost touched the palace gardens, Akash received a message unlike any he had carried before. It came from the front lines, written in the urgent hand of the kingdom's most trusted general, sealed with wax that still carried the smoky scent of battlefield fires. The message was brief, direct, and devastating. The kingdom's main army had been defeated in a major battle, scattered and demoralized. Worse, enemy forces were now advancing toward the capital with little to stop them. The general estimated they would reach the city's outer defenses within 5 days, and he strongly advised immediate preparation for siege, possible evacuation of the royal family, and desperate attempts to negotiate terms before the situation became hopeless. Akash read the message 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood something, that the words might somehow rearrange themselves into better news, but the facts remained unchanged. Defeat, retreat, imminent danger, possible catastrophe. This message would shatter the king's confidence, terrify the court, and potentially throw the entire kingdom into panic. As he prepared for the journey to the capital, Akash found his steps growing slower, his usual eagerness replaced by dread. He had carried bad news before, reports of crop failures, notices of deaths, warnings of various dangers. but nothing that would impact so many lives, nothing that would transform a king's world from confidence to desperation in the space of a few sentences. The closer he came to the palace, the more his anxiety grew. He began to imagine the king's reaction. The rage, the disbelief, the desperate questions about how such a defeat could have occurred. He pictured the court's response, the panic that would spread through the city, the chaos that might follow such devastating news. By the time Akash reached the palace gates, his hands were trembling, and his mind was racing with fears about the consequences of delivering such catastrophic information. The guards, who had known him for years, noticed his unusual pallor and asked if he was ill. "Just tired from the journey," he replied, though exhaustion was the least of his problems. As he waited in the antechamber outside the king's audience hall, Akash made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Looking at the sealed message in his hands, thinking of the chaos it would unleash, imagining the king's fury directed at the bearer of such terrible news, he chose to rewrite reality rather than report it. When called before the king, Akash presented himself with his usual formal bearing, but inside, his heart hammered like a battle drum. The king, surrounded by his advisors and courtiers, looked expectant and confident, clearly anticipating another report of military success. "What news from the front lines?" the king asked, settling back in his throne with the satisfied air of someone expecting confirmation of his strategic brilliance. Akash opened his mouth to deliver the true message, to report the defeat and warn of the approaching danger. But when he saw the king's expectant face, when he felt the weight of all those eyes upon him, when he imagined the explosion of rage and despair that would follow his words, he found himself speaking different words entirely. "Victory, Your Majesty," he heard himself say. "Our forces have won a decisive battle. The enemy is in full retreat." The lie came out smoothly, convincingly, with all the authority of his established reputation for honesty. The king's face lit up with pleasure. The courtiers murmured their satisfaction, and Akash felt a momentary relief at having avoided the scene of devastation he had dreaded. But even as the court celebrated this fictional victory, even as the king praised his generals and planned to press their supposed advantage, Akash felt something cold and terrible settling in his chest. He had broken the foundation upon which his entire life was built. He had chosen comfort over truth, temporary peace over necessary warning, his own fear over his duty to those who trusted him. "Excellent," the king said, rising from his throne with renewed energy. "Send word to the quartermaster to prepare supplies for our advancing troops, and dispatch orders to the regional governors. They can reduce their defensive preparations and send more men to support our victorious campaign." With each word, the king spoke, each decision based on Akash's false report. The weight of his deception grew heavier. The king was making plans that assumed victory when defeat was rushing toward them like a flood. Resources that should have been marshaled for defense would be sent away. Preparations that might have saved lives would be abandoned. All because Akash had chosen the sweet poison of comforting lies over the bitter medicine of necessary truth. That night, alone in his house, Akash burned the real message and tried to convince himself that he had made the right choice. Perhaps the general had been mistaken. Perhaps the situation would somehow improve before the consequences of his lie became apparent. Perhaps everything would work out despite his deception. But deep in his heart, he knew better. He had seen too many battlefields, carried too many urgent messages, understood too well the difference between hope and reality. The enemy was coming, and his kingdom was unprepared because he had chosen his own comfort over their survival. Sleep would not come that night, nor the next, nor the one after that. Akash lay awake thinking of the approaching army, of the defenses that were not being prepared, of the king's confident face as he made plans based on a lie. Every sound in the darkness might be the first sign of invasion. Every dawn might bring the enemy to the gates of an unsuspecting city. 3 days later, the first refugees began arriving in the capital, farmers and townspeople fleeing the approaching army, their faces hollow with exhaustion and terror, their few possessions strapped to their backs or loaded onto overtaxed carts. Their stories were consistent: a massive enemy force advancing rapidly, burning everything in its path, meeting no organized resistance because no one had expected them. The king, still believing in his fictional victory, interpreted these reports as the confused accounts of peasants who had panicked at the sight of his own returning troops. When his advisors suggested that perhaps they should investigate these stories more carefully, the king dismissed their concerns. "Our messenger brought clear word of victory," he said confidently. "These people have simply misunderstood what they've seen. Send out riders to guide our returning heroes home." But the riders sent to welcome the victorious army never returned, and still more refugees poured into the capital, their numbers growing by the hour, their stories becoming impossible to dismiss as confusion or panic. Akash watched this unfolding disaster from the shadows of his deception, knowing that each passing hour brought the kingdom closer to catastrophe, knowing that he possessed the key to understanding what was happening, but lacked the courage to use it. How could he admit that his report of victory had been a lie? How could he explain that he had chosen his own comfort over the safety of everyone in the kingdom? On the 4th morning after his false report, enemy scouts were spotted on the hills surrounding the capital. The truth could no longer be hidden or explained away. The kingdom's army had indeed been defeated. The enemy was indeed advancing, and the city was indeed unprepared for siege because its king had been making decisions based on completely false information. The panic that swept through the palace was unlike anything Akash had ever witnessed. Courtiers who had been celebrating fictional victories mere days before now ran through corridors spreading word of imminent invasion. The king, faced with undeniable evidence of approaching enemies, transformed from confident ruler to desperate strategist in the span of minutes. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his advisors, his voice cracking with the strain of sudden understanding. "Our forces were victorious. Our messenger brought word of the enemy's retreat." The advisors, faced with contradictory evidence they could not reconcile, offered confused explanations. Perhaps there had been a second battle. Perhaps new enemy forces had arrived. Perhaps their intelligence had been incomplete. No one suspected that the foundation of their understanding, the report of victory itself, had been built on deception. Akash stood in the back of the throne room, watching the chaos unfold, feeling as though he were drowning in the consequences of his choice. Each panicked order the king gave, each desperate preparation that should have been made days ago, each life that would be lost because the kingdom had been caught unprepared, all of it traced back to his moment of cowardice in this very room. The king's military advisors scrambled to assess their defensive capabilities. The city walls were strong, they reported, but the garrison was reduced because troops had been sent to support what they believed was a victorious campaign. Food stores were adequate for normal times, but had not been augmented for siege conditions. The civilian population was completely unprepared for the reality of war arriving at their doorstep. "Send riders immediately," the king commanded. "Recall every soldier we can reach, gather supplies for siege, prepare the walls, and find out what happened to our army. I want to know how victory turned to defeat so quickly." But it was too late for riders to make any meaningful difference. The enemy forces had moved faster than anyone had anticipated, and the kingdom's scattered troops were too far away to return in time. As for supplies, merchants had already begun to flee the city, taking their goods with them, and what remained was being hoarded by those who understood that siege meant starvation for the unprepared. Throughout that day and into the night, Akash wrestled with a growing understanding of the magnitude of his deception. He had not simply told a lie. He had altered the course of history, condemned his kingdom to face invasion without adequate preparation, sentenced unknown numbers of people to death or suffering because he had lacked the courage to speak difficult truths when they might have made a difference. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. He found himself unable to eat, unable to concentrate on anything except the approaching disaster that his cowardice had made infinitely worse. Every face he saw in the streets might belong to someone who would die because of his choice. Every child playing in ignorance of the coming danger carried the burden of his deception. Yet even now, even with the consequences of his lie becoming catastrophically clear, Akash could not bring himself to confess. How could he explain to a desperate king that their situation was even worse than it appeared, that the defeat had been known days ago but hidden behind false reports? How could he admit that precious time had been wasted, crucial preparations abandoned, because he had been too afraid to deliver unwelcome truth? The confession would serve no practical purpose now. The enemy would arrive within hours regardless of what he revealed. But it would destroy whatever remained of his reputation, expose him as the architect of disaster, make him the target of rage that the kingdom needed to direct somewhere. Better, he told himself, to maintain his deception and hope that somehow the consequences would not be as severe as he feared. By dawn, enemy banners could be seen from the city walls. The force was even larger than the refugees had described. Not just an army, but a vast host that darkened the hillsides like a living shadow. Their siege engines and supply trains stretched back beyond the horizon, and their disciplined formations spoke of professional soldiers confident in their superiority. The king stood on the highest tower of his palace, looking out at the force that had come to destroy his kingdom, trying to understand how his world had changed so completely in such a short time. Below him, his city began its transformation from peaceful center of commerce and culture to desperate fortress, hoping to survive the coming storm. Akash climbed the tower stairs, driven by a compulsion he could not name. Perhaps he hoped to finally find the courage to confess his deception. Perhaps he simply needed to witness the full extent of the disaster his cowardice had helped create. Or perhaps he was drawn by the same terrible fascination that makes people stare at fires they cannot extinguish. The king barely acknowledged his presence, too absorbed in studying the enemy formations, trying to devise some strategy that might save his kingdom from complete destruction. When he finally spoke, his words carried the hollow sound of a man who had looked into an abyss and seen his own reflection. "How did we miss this?" he asked, not really addressing Akash, but speaking his despair aloud. "Our intelligence network, our scouts, our communications. How did such a massive force move against us without warning?" Akash opened his mouth, the confession finally ready to spill out. But before he could speak, one of the king's advisors arrived with yet more devastating news. "Your Majesty," the man said breathlessly, having run up the tower stairs. "We've received another message from the front lines. It arrived through a different route, delayed by the confusion of retreat." He handed the king a travel-stained piece of parchment, and Akash felt his heart stop as he recognized the handwriting, the urgent script of the same general whose original message he had hidden behind his lie. The king read the second message aloud, his voice growing more strained with each word. Defeat complete, army scattered, enemy advancing rapidly on capital, estimate arrival in 5 days, prepare immediate defenses, evacuate if possible, situation desperate. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. The king looked at the message, then at the enemy host spreading across his lands, then back at the message again, trying to understand how he had received word of victory from the same source that now reported catastrophic defeat. This message is dated the same day as the one reporting our victory, he said slowly, the pieces of reality beginning to rearrange themselves in his mind. From the same general, from the same battlefield. Akash felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, the careful structure of his deception beginning to collapse under the weight of truth that could no longer be contained. The king was not a stupid man. Faced with contradictory messages from the same source, he would inevitably reach the correct conclusion about what had happened. Summon the messenger who brought word of our victory, the king commanded, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. I want to understand how we received such different accounts of the same battle. There was no escape now, no way to avoid the reckoning that Akash had feared and postponed through days of growing disaster. In moments, he would be called to account not just for his original lie, but for every consequence that had flowed from it, the lack of preparation, the wasted time, the false confidence that had led to additional strategic errors. As the summons came and Akash stepped forward, he realized that his fear of delivering bad news had created a situation infinitely worse than anything the original message could have caused. The king's rage at learning of military defeat would have been nothing compared to his fury at discovering that his kingdom had been betrayed by the very messenger system he had trusted with his life. You brought me word of victory, the king said, his voice deadly quiet as he held up both messages. But here is another report from the same general, sent on the same day, describing complete defeat. Explain this contradiction. The truth hung in the air between them like a blade. Akash could feel the eyes of everyone present fixed upon him, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the impossible situation. The consequences of his confession would be severe. Disgrace, punishment, possibly death for treason in time of war. But the consequences of maintaining his lie were becoming equally impossible to sustain. Your Majesty, Akash began, his voice barely audible above the sound of his hammering heart. The words he had rehearsed in sleepless nights suddenly seemed inadequate, too small to carry the weight of what he needed to reveal. Before he could continue, another commotion arose from the courtyard below. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew everyone's attention to the windows, where they could see a group of soldiers escorting someone through the gates. A figure so covered in mud and blood that his identity was initially unclear. A survivor from the front lines, one of the advisors reported after calling down to the guards. He says he has urgent information for the king. Within minutes, the survivor stood before them, a young officer whom the king recognized, a trusted aide to the general who had written both messages. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt with exhaustion and trauma, but his eyes held the clear light of someone who had witnessed events too important to be distorted by fatigue or fear. Your Majesty, the officer said, swaying on his feet but speaking with the clarity of desperate urgency. I bring word from General Madhav. Our forces were completely routed 5 days ago. The enemy has been advancing steadily since then. I was sent immediately after the battle with word of our defeat, but I fear my message may have been lost or delayed. The king's face went pale as the implications became clear. 5 days ago, he repeated slowly. And when did you expect your message to arrive? 3 days past, Your Majesty. The general specifically ordered me to inform you that immediate preparation for siege was essential, that the enemy would reach the capital within 5 days of the battle. The mathematics of deception were now laid bare for everyone to see. The officer had been sent with news of defeat that should have arrived 3 days ago. Instead, the king had received a report of victory that had prevented any of the urgent preparations that might have saved the kingdom. All eyes turned to Akash, and in that moment, he understood that his choice to avoid difficult truth had not only failed in its purpose, but had created a catastrophe far beyond anything he had feared. The temporary comfort of his lie had lasted mere days, but its consequences would echo through generations. I received a different message, the king said, his voice carrying the cold precision of a man who had suddenly understood the full scope of his betrayal. A report of victory, delivered by my most trusted messenger. But now I begin to see how we arrived at our current situation. The confession that Akash had struggled to voice was no longer necessary. The truth was assembling itself from the evidence, piece by inevitable piece, and his role in the disaster was becoming clear to everyone present. The trusted messenger, the man whose word had been accepted without question for years, had become the architect of his kingdom's destruction through a single moment of cowardice. Rest now and breathe gently. Feel your chest rising and falling with each natural breath. There is no message you need to deliver, no difficult truth you must face in this moment. Simply rest in the safety of this present moment, where nothing requires your immediate action or response. Let us continue to see how Akash's choices have shaped the fate of his kingdom, and discover what lessons emerge from the consequences of avoiding difficult truths. The silence in the throne room stretched like a taut rope, heavy with the weight of understanding that was crystallizing in every mind present. Akash felt as though he were standing at the center of a collapsing world, watching the destruction spread outward in waves from his single act of deception. The king's advisors began to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. Precious days had been lost while they prepared for advancing victory instead of defending against approaching defeat. Resources had been allocated based on false assumptions. Military decisions had been made in complete ignorance of the true situation. The kingdom's fate had been sealed not by enemy strategy, but by their own messengers' inability to speak unwelcome truth. 3 days, the king said, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. We could have had 3 additional days to prepare our defenses, to recall our scattered forces, to prepare our people for siege. 3 days that might have meant the difference between survival and destruction. The young officer, swaying with exhaustion, looked confused by the tension filling the room. From his perspective, he had simply delivered the message he had been entrusted with. Though later than intended, due to the chaos of retreat, he could not yet understand that his arrival had exposed a deception that had doomed his kingdom. Your Majesty, the officer continued, General Madhav also wanted me to convey his assessment of the enemy's capabilities. Their force is larger than we initially estimated, and their siege equipment suggests they are prepared for an extended campaign. He believes our only hope lies in immediate negotiation or... He paused, reluctant to speak the words. Or evacuation of the royal family while escape routes remain open. The king's laugh was bitter and without humor. Negotiation or evacuation, he repeated. Options that might have been viable 3 days ago, when we still had time to prepare. Now we are trapped in our own city, surrounded by enemies who know we are unprepared, facing siege with inadequate supplies and insufficient defenses. Akash felt the weight of every word like physical blows, each strategic option that had been lost, each preparation that had been neglected, each life that would be forfeit. All of it traced back to his moment of weakness, his choice to prioritize his own comfort over his duty to speak truth regardless of its consequences. The king turned his attention fully to Akash, and in his eyes was a coldness that spoke of more than royal displeasure. It was the look of a ruler who had discovered treachery at the heart of his most trusted systems. "You will explain to me," the king said, each word precise and terrible, "how you came to deliver a message of victory when the reality was catastrophic defeat. You will account for every decision you made, every word you spoke, every consequence that has flowed from your actions." There was no escape now from the confession Akash had postponed through days of growing horror. The truth would emerge whether he spoke it willingly or had it extracted through interrogation. His reputation for honesty, built over years of faithful service, would be destroyed either way. But perhaps in confession, he might find some small measure of redemption, some way to serve truth even as his world collapsed around him. "Your Majesty," Akash began, his voice breaking with the strain of words he had never thought he would need to speak. "I did receive the general's original message reporting the defeat of our forces and the approach of enemy armies." The admission fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock and understanding through everyone present. Several of the advisors took involuntary steps backward, as if physical distance could protect them from the implications of what they were hearing. "You received word of defeat," the king repeated slowly, "and chose to report victory instead." "Yes, Your Majesty," while knowing that enemy forces were advancing toward our capital. "Yes, Your Majesty," while understanding that immediate preparation was essential for our survival. "Yes, Your Majesty." Each acknowledgement drove the knife of truth deeper into the wound of deception. Akash felt simultaneously relieved to finally speak the truth and horrified by the weight of what his honesty revealed. He had not simply lied, he had actively sabotaged his kingdom's ability to defend itself. The king's advisors began to whisper among themselves, their voices carrying disbelief and growing anger. Here was treason beyond anything they had imagined, not betrayal born of loyalty to an enemy, but betrayal born of simple cowardice, the inability to deliver difficult news when it might have saved countless lives. "Explain your reasoning," the king commanded. "Help me understand how a man whose honesty I trusted above all others came to make such a choice." Akash struggled to find words that could convey the thought process that had seemed rational in the moment, but now appeared utterly inexplicable. How could he explain the fear that had seemed so overwhelming at the time, the desperate desire to avoid the king's anger, the naive hope that somehow the situation might resolve itself if he just delayed the inevitable? "I feared Your Majesty's reaction to such devastating news," he said finally. "I imagined the anger, the accusations, the chaos that would follow. In that moment it seemed easier to delay the truth, to hope that perhaps the situation might somehow improve." "Easier?" the king repeated, his voice carrying a weight of contempt that made Akash flinch. "You found it easier to condemn our kingdom to destruction than to face my displeasure at receiving unwelcome news." The brutal simplicity of the king's summary left no room for rationalization or excuse. Akash had indeed chosen his own momentary comfort over the survival of everyone he was sworn to serve. The fear that had seemed so compelling in the moment now appeared trivial compared to the consequences it had produced. The young officer from the front lines, finally understanding what he had stumbled into, looked at Akash with a mixture of horror and disbelief. This was the trusted messenger whose reputation had been legendary throughout the kingdom, The man whose word was considered as reliable as sunrise, revealed now as the architect of disaster through simple cowardice. "The general will be devastated to learn of this," the officer said quietly. "He spoke of you often, praised your reliability, said that sending messages through you was like placing them directly in the king's hands. He never imagined that his urgent warning would be transformed into false reassurance." This casual mention of the general's trust hit Akash harder than all the king's anger. He had betrayed not just his duty to the crown, but the faith of a military commander who had depended on him to save the kingdom. Somewhere on a battlefield, believing his message had been delivered faithfully, the general was perhaps, even now, planning desperate strategies based on the assumption that the capital was preparing for siege. The king walked to the window and looked out at the enemy host that now surrounded his city. From this height, the invading army looked like a dark sea that had flooded the green valleys, obliterating everything familiar and safe. Smoke rose from distant villages, marking the path of destruction that had brought the enemy to his gates. 3 days, he said again, not turning from the window. 3 days when we might have recalled our scattered forces, negotiated from a position of knowledge rather than surprise, prepared our defenses properly, or evacuated our most vulnerable citizens. He paused, his shoulders sagging under the weight of realization. 3 days that your cowardice has stolen from us. The arithmetic of disaster was becoming clear to everyone in the room. Every hour of delay had cost them options. Every day of false confidence had reduced their chances of survival. The kingdom's fate had been sealed not by enemy superiority, but by their own messengers' inability to face difficult reality. "What are our actual capabilities?" the king asked his military advisors, finally turning from the window. "No more false optimism, no more assumptions based on lies. I want to know exactly what we can and cannot do in our current situation." The advisors consulted briefly among themselves before delivering their assessment. The city walls were strong, but the garrison was at half strength. Food supplies would last perhaps 2 weeks under siege conditions. The civilian population was largely unprepared and increasingly panicked as news of the surrounding army spread. Most devastating of all, their scattered military forces were too far away to return before the siege tightened completely. "So we face siege with inadequate defenders, insufficient supplies, and no prospect of relief," the king summarized grimly. "Because our most trusted messenger chose comfort over duty." The weight of collective judgment was crushing. Akash could feel the hatred radiating from everyone present, but even more unbearable was the knowledge that their hatred was entirely justified. He had indeed prioritized his own momentary comfort over the survival of his kingdom, chosen temporary peace over necessary warning, selected personal ease over public duty. As the morning wore on and reports continued to arrive from various parts of the city, the full scope of their unpreparedness became clear. Merchants had been allowed to leave with their goods instead of being required to sell to the city for siege supplies. Citizens with useful skills had departed when they might have been retained for defense. Military equipment had been sent to support the supposed victorious campaign instead of being stockpiled for home defense. Each revelation drove home the same terrible truth. Every decision made in the past 3 days had been based on the false assumption of victory, and every one of those decisions had made their actual situation worse. The kingdom had not just failed to prepare for siege, it had actively prepared for the wrong scenario entirely. "There is one more thing your majesty must know," the young officer said hesitantly, clearly reluctant to add to the catalog of disasters. "The general instructed me to tell you that if immediate evacuation was chosen, the enemy has left only one route open, the mountain pass to the north. but he believes this apparent escape route may be intentional, designed to channel evacuees into a trap. Even the option of flight, it seemed, had been compromised by delay. An escape route that might have been viable 3 days earlier was now suspect, possibly transformed from salvation into another form of destruction. The king closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked not like a ruler, but like any man overwhelmed by the magnitude of disaster befalling those he was responsible to protect. When he opened them again, his gaze fixed on Akash with an intensity that seemed to burn. "You have destroyed more than a kingdom," he said quietly. "You have destroyed the very concept of trust upon which civilization depends. How can any ruler ever again believe a messenger? How can any urgent communication be accepted at face value? Your single act of cowardice has poisoned the well of truth from which all effective governance must drink." This was perhaps the cruelest insight of all, that Akash's deception would outlive even the current crisis, creating doubt and suspicion that would hamper communication long after the immediate disaster had passed. He had not just betrayed his current duty, but had damaged the very institution of truthful communication upon which future safety depended. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their grim discussion. From the window, they could see a small group of enemy riders approaching under a flag of truce, the formal beginning of siege negotiations, the moment when the kingdom would learn what terms their enemies offered for survival. "They come to discuss our surrender," the king observed with bitter irony, "and we must negotiate from the weakest possible position because we have had no time to prepare, no opportunity to demonstrate strength, no chance to show that conquest will be costly. They know we are unprepared because our own actions, or lack of action, have revealed our weakness." As the enemy envoys passed through the city gates and made their way toward the palace, Akash understood that he was about to witness the final consequences of his deception. Whatever terms were offered, whatever fate awaited the kingdom, it would all trace back to his moment of cowardice in this very room when he had chosen comfortable lies over necessary truth. The delegation that climbed the palace steps moved with the confident bearing of representatives who knew they held all the advantages. They had timed their approach perfectly, allowing just enough time for panic to set in while preventing any meaningful preparation. Their intelligence network had clearly informed them of the kingdom's unprepared state, though they probably did not know that this unpreparedness stemmed from deliberately false information rather than simple incompetence. Soon, Akash knew. He would learn whether his choice to avoid delivering bad news had transformed a military defeat into complete national catastrophe, whether his fear of the king's anger had condemned an entire people to death or slavery, whether his single moment of weakness would echo through history as the pivotal point where a kingdom's fate was sealed by cowardice rather than conquered by strength. The enemy envoys entered the throne room with measured steps, their polished armor and ceremonial weapons speaking of a force confident in its position. Their leader, a tall man whose scarred face told of many campaigns, surveyed the assembled court with eyes that missed nothing. The pale faces of advisors, the trembling hands of courtiers, the hollow look of a king who had discovered betrayal at the heart of his kingdom. "Your Majesty," the envoy said, his voice carrying the formal courtesy that preceded either generous terms or complete destruction. "I bring greetings from Emperor Darius and proposals for the resolution of our current situation." The king straightened in his throne, summoning whatever dignity remained to him despite the catastrophic circumstances. "Speak your terms." "My lord offers 3 choices," the envoy continued, producing a scroll from his leather satchel. "First, unconditional surrender, your crown, your kingdom, your life, all placed entirely at the emperor's discretion. In return, the siege ends immediately, and no further destruction befalls your city. A murmur of horror passed through the assembled court. Unconditional surrender meant not just defeat, but the complete erasure of their independence, their culture, their very identity as a people. Second, conditional surrender. You retain nominal authority as a vassal king. Your people keep their customs and properties, but you pay tribute annually and provide soldiers for the emperor's campaigns. Your city remains unharmed, but your kingdom becomes part of our empire. This option carried the bitter taste of survival purchased through submission, but at least it preserved some form of continuity, some hope that their people would endure even under foreign rule. Third, trial by siege. You attempt to defend your city against our full force. If you somehow prevail, though my lord considers this unlikely given your current preparations, you retain full independence. If you fail, as seems inevitable, then no quarter will be given. Your city will be destroyed, your people enslaved or scattered, your kingdom erased from maps and memory alike. The envoy rolled up his scroll with deliberate care, allowing the weight of these choices to settle over the court like falling stones. My lord is generous in offering these alternatives, he continued. Lesser enemies have received only the third option, but he recognizes that circumstances may have interfered with your ability to prepare adequate defenses, and so he extends mercy to a kingdom that might have proven more formidable under different conditions. The cruel irony was not lost on anyone present. The enemy's mercy stemmed directly from their knowledge that the kingdom was unprepared, undefended, caught completely off guard by an invasion they should have seen coming days earlier. Akash felt the weight of every word like accusations thrown directly at his conscience. How long do I have to consider these terms? The king asked. Until sunset today. My lord's patience, while considerable, is not infinite. The longer this siege continues, the more expensive it becomes for us, and the less generous our final terms will be. After the envoys departed, the throne room fell into a silence so complete that the sound of distant preparations for siege seemed to echo from another world. The king sat motionless on his throne, staring at nothing, while his advisors waited for guidance that he seemed incapable of providing. Finally, one of the senior counselors cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we must consider our options. Options, the king repeated hollowly. Yes, let us consider the options that remain to us, thanks to our faithful messenger's dedication to truth. The sarcasm in his voice was more cutting than outright rage would have been. Akash felt as though he were being slowly flayed, each word peeling away another layer of his remaining dignity. The first option is unacceptable, another advisor said quietly. Complete surrender means trusting our fate entirely to an enemy's whim. History shows such trust is rarely rewarded with mercy. The third option seems equally impossible, added the military commander who had remained in the city. Our walls are strong, but our garrison is too small, our supplies too limited, our people too frightened. We might hold out for a few weeks, but the outcome would be certain. Which leaves vassalage, the king said, survival purchased through submission, independence traded for existence. The debate that followed was painful to witness. Each option carried its own form of destruction, immediate and complete, gradual and humiliating, or delayed but total. There were no good choices remaining, only degrees of disaster, only different forms of defeat. As the discussion continued, Akash found himself thinking of a conversation he had once had with his father years ago when he was first learning the messenger's trade. They had been walking along a mountain path, and his father had pointed to a massive boulder that had recently fallen across the trail, forcing travelers to take a longer, more difficult route. "See that stone?" his father had said. "It fell because of a small crack that grew larger over time. Water seeped in, froze during winter, expanded, widened the crack. Season after season, the damage spread until the whole face of the mountain became unstable. One small flaw, ignored because it seemed insignificant, eventually brought down something that had stood for centuries." At the time, Akash had thought his father was simply making conversation about geology. Now he understood that it had been a lesson about truth, how small deceptions, seemingly harmless compromises, minor avoidances of difficulty could expand over time until they brought down entire structures of trust and reliability. His single lie had been like that crack in the mountain face. It had seemed small in the moment, a minor deviation from truth to avoid immediate discomfort. But it had expanded, multiplied, created consequences that rippled outward until they brought down not just his own reputation, but his entire kingdom's ability to defend itself. "We need more information," one of the advisors was saying. "Perhaps we could send scouts to assess the enemy's true strength, look for weaknesses in their positions, find some advantage we haven't considered." "With what scouts?" the military commander replied bitterly. "Most of our cavalry was sent to support what we believed was a victorious campaign. We have perhaps a dozen horsemen remaining, barely enough to patrol our own walls, much less venture out for reconnaissance." Each limitation they discussed traced back to decisions made in the past 3 days, choices based on the false assumption of victory that Akash's deception had created. They were not just facing siege. They were facing siege with their forces scattered, their supplies depleted, their intelligence networks disrupted, all because they had been preparing for the wrong scenario entirely. "What of the mountain pass?" asked another counselor. "The northern route that might still be open?" "Possibly a trap," the king replied. "But even if genuine, it would only allow the royal family and a few others to escape. We would be abandoning our people to face the consequences of our failures." The moral weight of this possibility seemed to press down on everyone present. How could a king flee to safety while leaving his subjects to face siege, slavery, or death? Yet how could he choose certain destruction for everyone when some form of survival might be possible? As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the throne room floor, Akash realized that the time for confession and consequences had passed. The immediate crisis now demanded decisions about survival, and his personal guilt, however crushing, was less important than the choices that would determine the fate of thousands of people. Yet, he could not escape the knowledge that every option now under consideration was worse than what might have been available if he had simply delivered the original message faithfully. The kingdom faced not just military defeat, but the complete destruction of alternatives, the narrowing of possibilities to a handful of bitter choices. "There is one more factor we should consider," the young officer from the front lines said hesitantly. "General Madhav's message mentioned that the enemy's supply lines are extended. If they become committed to a lengthy siege, they might face difficulties of their own." "How lengthy could we hold out?" the king asked. The military commander consulted with several of his subordinates before answering. 2 weeks, perhaps 3 if we implement strict rationing immediately. But the civilian population would suffer greatly, and we have no guarantee that enemy difficulties would develop quickly enough to matter. 2 or 3 weeks, Akash tried to imagine that span of time, each day filled with the knowledge that his deception had brought about whatever suffering, starvation, or death occurred within the city walls. Each night, he would lie awake, knowing that every hardship endured by the people of his kingdom flowed directly from his moment of cowardice. But even worse was the understanding that if the siege succeeded, if the city eventually fell despite whatever resistance they mounted, the final assault would be more brutal because of the time and resources the enemy had been forced to invest. Prolonged sieges typically ended in massacre, not mercy. "Your Majesty," said the oldest of his advisors, a man whose service to the crown spanned 3 generations, "perhaps we should also consider what message our choice sends to future generations. How we face this crisis will be remembered long after the immediate consequences have played out." The king looked up sharply. "Meaning? If we choose vassalage, we teach our children that submission is preferable to struggle, that independence can be traded for security. If we choose doomed resistance, we teach them that principle matters more than survival. If we choose flight," he spread his hands, "we teach them that leadership means abandoning responsibility when it becomes too difficult to bear." None of these lessons carried comfort or easy answers. Each choice would indeed echo through whatever remained of their culture, shaping how future generations understood courage, duty, and the price of freedom. As the afternoon wore on and the deadline for decision approached, messengers began arriving with reports from throughout the city. Citizens were fleeing toward the center, abandoning homes near the walls. Merchants were hiding their goods or trying to smuggle them out through whatever routes remained open. Panic was spreading like fire through dry grass, fed by rumors that grew worse with each retelling. "The people look to us for leadership," the king observed, watching another group of refugees pass beneath his window. "They trust that we will make the choice that best serves their interests. Yet every option before us serves those interests poorly." Akash wanted to speak, to somehow contribute to this desperate discussion, to offer some insight or alternative that might improve their situation. But what could he say? His voice in this chamber had become not just unwelcome, but actively poisonous. Any suggestion he made would be tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal, any wisdom he offered undermined by his demonstrated lack of judgment. He had made himself irrelevant to the very process his deception had necessitated. The kingdom needed clear thinking and honest counsel to navigate their crisis, but the man whose job it had been to provide clear and honest communication had proven himself incapable of both. "We should hear from the common people," suggested one of the younger advisors. "Their fate hangs on our decision. Perhaps they deserve a voice in making it." "And tell them what?" the king replied. "That their kingdom faces destruction because their most trusted messenger chose comfort over duty? That we are unprepared for siege because the man sworn to deliver urgent communications delivered lies instead?" The suggestion, well-intentioned as it was, highlighted another dimension of their disaster. How could they explain their situation to the people without revealing the deception that had caused it? And if they did reveal the truth, would it comfort anyone to know that their fate had been sealed not by enemy superiority, but by the cowardice of one man they had trusted? The sun continued its relentless journey toward the horizon, marking the passage of their final hours of decision. Enemy patrols could be seen moving around the city's perimeter, tightening the siege lines, eliminating any remaining escape routes except the questionable mountain pass to the north. "We could attempt to negotiate better terms," suggested the chief diplomat. "Request more time, propose modifications to their offers, seek some middle ground between their alternatives." "From what position of strength?" the king asked wearily. "They know we are unprepared, undefended, caught completely by surprise. What incentive do they have to improve terms that already favor them overwhelmingly?" It was true. Every aspect of their situation advertised weakness and unpreparedness. The enemy had no reason to offer better terms to a kingdom that had demonstrated its complete inability to anticipate or prepare for invasion. As evening approached, bringing with it the moment of irrevocable choice, Akash made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Rising from his position at the back of the throne room, he stepped forward and spoke for the first time since his confession. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber with surprising steadiness, "I request permission to carry one final message." The king's eyes narrowed with something approaching hatred. "You dare to speak of carrying messages? You who have proven that your word is worthless, that your service is treachery disguised as duty?" "Yes, Your Majesty, because perhaps the man who caused this disaster is the appropriate person to attempt some small measure of repair." The suggestion hung in the air like incense, heavy and difficult to dismiss despite its source. Several advisors began to object, but the king raised his hand for silence. "Explain." Akash took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to propose would likely mean his death, but might, in some small way, serve the truth he had abandoned when it mattered most. "Let me carry word to General Madhav," he said. "If he still lives, if any of our forces remain intact, perhaps there is some strategy, some possibility we have not considered. At worst, I will die in the attempt, which seems fitting justice for my crimes. At best, I might learn something that could improve our situation." The proposal was desperate, almost certainly futile, and quite possibly suicidal. The enemy controlled all the territory between the city and wherever the general might be found. Even if Akash somehow reached him, even if some remnant of their army still existed, the likelihood of discovering any useful alternative seemed vanishingly small. But it was also the only suggestion that offered any possibility, however remote, of action rather than passive choice between predetermined forms of defeat. "You would volunteer to attempt this journey?" the king asked, his voice carrying both skepticism and a grudging recognition that the offer, however unlikely to succeed, represented some form of attempted atonement. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Through enemy-controlled territory, with almost no chance of success or return?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The king was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the practical merits of the proposal, but perhaps also the poetic justice of sending the messenger whose deception had created their crisis on a mission that might, if successful, provide some small amelioration of the disaster. "Even if you reached the general," one of the advisors objected, "even if he had some strategy we haven't considered, there would not be time to implement it before our deadline expires." "Then we ask the enemy for more time," Akash replied. "Tell them we are considering their terms carefully, that a decision of such magnitude requires proper deliberation. If I can return with any possibility of hope, perhaps the delay will prove worthwhile." It was a fragile plan, built on multiple unlikely contingencies, but it was also the only suggestion that offered any alternative to choosing between the three grim options the enemy had presented. "And if you are captured?" the king asked. "If they learn of your mission and realize we are seeking alternatives to their generous terms?" "Then I will die," Akash said simply. "And you will be no worse off than if I had never made the attempt." The logic was cold, but accurate. His mission could not make their situation worse, and it might, against all reasonable probability, discover some alternative they had not considered. After another long silence, the king nodded slowly. "Very well, but understand this. If you return with false hope, if you bring me another lie disguised as good news, I will have you executed in the public square as a traitor to the realm. Your death will serve as warning to any future messenger who considers comfort more important than truth. I understand, Your Majesty, and if you simply flee, if you use this mission as an excuse to escape the consequences of your deception, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth and make your death far slower and more painful than anything you might face from enemy soldiers. I understand, Your Majesty. The preparations for his departure were swift and grim. A fast horse, what little remained of their military intelligence about enemy positions, and a message to carry should he somehow reach the general. A request for any strategic insight that might improve their hopeless situation. As Akash prepared to leave the palace that had been the center of his life for so many years, he realized that regardless of whether his mission succeeded or failed, he would never return to his former existence. The trust that had been the foundation of his identity was broken beyond repair. The reputation that had defined his place in the world was destroyed. Even if he somehow survived this desperate journey, even if he brought back information that helped save the kingdom, he would remain forever marked as the man whose deception had brought them to the brink of destruction. But perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps the man who had chosen comfortable lies over difficult truths deserved to spend whatever remained of his life seeking redemption that would always remain just beyond reach. As he mounted his horse in the palace courtyard, Akash looked up at the windows of the throne room where the king and his advisors continued their desperate deliberations. In a few hours, they would need to send their answer to the enemy's ultimatum. His mission was a gamble against impossible odds, a desperate hope that somewhere in the chaos of their scattered forces lay some possibility they had not yet considered. The city gates opened just wide enough to allow his passage, then closed behind him with a finality that sounded like the sealing of a tomb. Before him stretched enemy-controlled territory, darkness, and the slim possibility that somewhere in that hostile landscape lay the general who might hold the key to their salvation. Behind him lay the kingdom his cowardice had doomed, the people whose fate had been sealed by his inability to speak unwelcome truths, and the king who now faced impossible choices because his most trusted messenger had chosen lies over loyalty when truth mattered most. Breathe deeply now, feeling the steadiness of your own heart, the reliability of your breath. Rest in the knowledge that truth, however difficult, is always kinder than the elaborate structures of deception we build to avoid it. In this quiet moment, there is no crisis to face, no terrible choice to make, simply the invitation to be present with what is real and true, right now. Let us turn to another story, one that explores how small betrayals of our values can grow into habits that eventually consume everything we once held sacred. In a monastery that clung to a mountainside like a bird's nest built in stone, there lived a monk named Dayal, whose dedication to the practice of nonviolence was absolute and inspiring to all who knew him. He would not kill even the smallest insect, going to great lengths to relocate spiders and beetles that wandered into his cell, rather than simply crushing them as other monks might do. When walking the mountain paths, he watched each step carefully to avoid treading on creatures too small to see clearly. His meals consisted only of fruits and vegetables that could be harvested without ending life, and he had devoted his adult years to studying and teaching the Buddha's instructions about ahimsa, the principle of non-harm that forms the foundation of ethical living. Dayal's commitment to this practice was not merely intellectual or ritualistic. It flowed from a deep understanding that all life is interconnected, that harm inflicted on any being ultimately harms the whole fabric of existence, that violence in any form perpetuates cycles of suffering that extend far beyond their immediate victims. This understanding had transformed not just his actions, but his entire way of being in the world, filling him with a gentleness that seemed to radiate outward like warmth from a well-tended fire. The other monks in the monastery respected Dayal's dedication, though some found his extreme care somewhat excessive. When he would spend long minutes carefully removing a single ant from his meditation cushion, or when he would interrupt important discussions to relocate a moth that had flown too close to their oil lamps, a few of his brothers would exchange glances that spoke of patience wearing thin, but none could deny that his commitment was sincere, and his teaching on the subject of non-violence carried an authority born of lived experience rather than mere scholarly knowledge. Dayal taught that the principle of non-harm begins with obvious prohibitions: not killing, not causing physical pain, not destroying life unnecessarily, but extends into subtle territories that require constant vigilance. Harsh speech could wound more deeply than physical blows. Indifference to suffering could enable harm as surely as direct violence. Even thoughts of anger or revenge could poison the mind and prepare the ground for actions that would violate the principle of ahimsa. This understanding shaped every aspect of his life within the monastery. He spoke gently to novice monks who struggled with their studies, never using shame or humiliation as teaching tools. He worked in the monastery gardens with infinite patience, tending plants with the same careful attention he gave to his meditation practice. When conflicts arose between members of the community, he served as mediator, helping disputants find resolution without anyone losing face or suffering unnecessary pain. The monastery itself was known throughout the region for its commitment to non-violence, and much of this reputation rested on Dayal's influence and example. Visitors came from distant provinces to hear his teachings, and several other monasteries had requested copies of his written commentaries on the Buddha's instructions regarding ahimsa. He had become, without seeking the distinction, one of the most respected teachers of nonviolence in their tradition. But Dayal's greatest challenge was not philosophical or theological. It was deeply practical and involved the monastery's relationship with the surrounding mountain communities. The monastery supported itself through various means: donations from lay practitioners, income from copying manuscripts, payments for teaching services provided to other religious communities. But their most reliable source of support came from an arrangement with local farmers and herders who used the monastery's extensive lands for grazing their animals and growing crops that the mountain soil could support. These arrangements were managed by the monastery's treasurer, an older monk named Kiran, who handled all financial matters with scrupulous attention to detail and fairness. For many years, the system had worked smoothly. Farmers paid reasonable fees for land use, the monastery received steady income, and both parties benefited from relationships built on trust and mutual respect. But recently, economic pressures had been building in the mountain communities. Poor harvests, increased taxation from the distant capital, competition from larger agricultural operations in the valleys. All of these factors had combined to squeeze the small farmers and herders who had been the monastery's partners for generations. As their financial situations became more desperate, some began to fall behind in their payments to the monastery, not from dishonesty or unwillingness to pay, but from simple inability to generate the required income from land that seemed to be yielding less each year, despite their best efforts. Kiran brought these problems to the monastery's council, explaining that several families were now months behind in their payments, that others were requesting reductions in their fees, and that some might need to be released from their agreements entirely if their situations did not improve. For most monasteries, this would have been a manageable problem, requiring difficult but straightforward decisions. Reduce fees where possible, extend payment schedules where practical, and when necessary, terminate agreements with those who could not meet their obligations. The monastery had other potential sources of income, and with careful management, they could weather a period of reduced revenue from land use. But this monastery faced a complication that made such decisions more complex. Several of the struggling families included members who had devoted decades of service to the monastery, men who had helped build their current buildings, women who had provided food during periods of scarcity, children who had grown up playing in the monastery courtyards and were considered almost part of the community. Terminating agreements with these families would not just mean lost income, it would mean forcing people who were practically family members to leave lands they had worked for generations, to abandon homes and communities, to become refugees in their own mountain homeland. When the council discussed this situation, most of the monks agreed that compassion required them to be flexible, to accept reduced payments or extended schedules, to prioritize relationships over revenue even if it meant financial hardship for the monastery itself. But one monk raised a concern that gave everyone pause. If we cannot meet our own expenses, he pointed out, if we cannot maintain the monastery, feed ourselves, keep our buildings in repair, then we cannot continue to serve the larger community. Our teaching, our meditation practice, our service to lay practitioners, all of this depends on maintaining a sustainable foundation. This was true and troubling. The monastery's spiritual work required practical support, and if their financial situation became truly desperate, they might face dissolution or be forced to abandon their mountain location for more economically viable arrangements elsewhere. The discussion continued through several meetings without reaching a clear resolution. Everyone agreed that the current situation was unsustainable. They could not continue indefinitely accepting reduced or delayed payments from tenants who might never be able to meet their full obligations. But no one wanted to be the first to suggest forcing struggling families off lands their ancestors had worked for centuries. It was during one of these council meetings that Dayal made a suggestion that seemed to offer a solution to their dilemma. Perhaps, he said carefully, we could arrange for some of the struggling families to work off their debts through service to the monastery. Manual labor, assistance with construction projects, help with our agricultural work. This would allow them to maintain their residency while meeting their obligations in a form they can manage. The suggestion was reasonable and appeared to serve everyone's interests. Families could remain on their lands and in their communities while contributing to the monastery through work instead of cash payments. The monastery would receive necessary labor while maintaining its commitment to compassion and community support. After considerable discussion, the council approved Dayal's proposal, and he volunteered to work with Kiran to develop the specific arrangements with each struggling family. The first agreements went smoothly. 3 families readily accepted the opportunity to work off their debts, and their labor proved valuable to the monastery's various maintenance and expansion projects. Men who had fallen behind in their monetary payments found they could contribute carpentry skills, stonework, and agricultural knowledge that the monastery genuinely needed. But as the program expanded to include more families, as the economic pressures in the mountain communities continued to worsen, the arrangements became more complex and demanding. What had begun as a few days of work per month to offset reduced rent payments grew into commitments that required entire families to spend most of their time serving the monastery's needs. Dayal found himself managing a system that increasingly resembled not voluntary cooperation, but something uncomfortably close to indentured servitude. Families who had once been independent farmers and herders were now dependent on the monastery's approval for their most basic decisions about land use, work schedules, and resource allocation. This gradual transformation happened so slowly, so incrementally, that Dayal barely noticed the shift from helping struggling families to controlling their lives. Each individual decision seemed reasonable in isolation, requiring a few more hours of work here, extending a commitment there, adding new obligations as the monastery's needs grew and expanded. But the cumulative effect was the creation of a system in which people who had once been partners were becoming servants, in which families who had once enjoyed independence were becoming dependent on the monastery's continued goodwill for their survival. The first family to object was led by an old farmer named Govind, whose grandfather had originally negotiated the land use agreement with the monastery's previous abbot. Govind had watched his family's situation deteriorate from occasional volunteer labor to constant service, from freely chosen cooperation to mandatory compliance with increasingly demanding requirements. "Brother Dayal," he said one morning as they met to discuss his family's work schedule for the coming month, "this arrangement is no longer working for us. The labor you require now takes so much time that we cannot properly tend our own crops or animals. We are becoming servants instead of partners." Dayal looked at the scheduling documents spread across his desk, charts and lists that tracked each family's work commitments, debt status, and performance evaluations. When had this simple arrangement become so complex, so bureaucratic, so controlling? "I understand your concern," Dayal replied, though he felt defensive about a system he had created with the best of intentions. "But you must remember that without this arrangement, your family would have lost their land use rights entirely. The monastery has shown great flexibility in working with you through difficult times." Govind nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of this statement, while clearly struggling with its implications. "Yes, brother, we are grateful for the monastery's compassion. But what we have now is not compassion. It is dependence. My children spend more time working for the monastery than learning the skills they will need to manage their own farms. My wife has no time for her own household because she is constantly preparing food for monastery projects. We are losing our ability to live independently." The complaint was fair and troubling, but Dayal found himself responding, not with the compassion that had motivated his original proposal, but with the bureaucratic logic that had grown up around it. "The monastery has invested considerable resources in training your family, in providing tools and materials for projects, in allowing you to remain on valuable land despite your inability to pay market rates. Surely some recognition of this investment is reasonable." As the words left his mouth, Dayal heard something in his own voice that shocked him, the tone of someone defending a system of exploitation, justifying arrangements that trapped people in cycles of dependence, prioritizing institutional needs over human dignity. This was not the voice of a monk dedicated to nonviolence. This was the voice of someone who had somehow become complicit in a form of harm so subtle and gradual that he had not noticed its development. Govind left that meeting with his family's work obligations unchanged, but his parting words carried a weight that haunted Dayal through the following days. "Brother, I think you should ask yourself whether the system you have created serves the principle of ahimsa as you understand it, or whether it serves the monastery's convenience while calling itself compassion." That night, alone in his cell, with only the mountain wind for company, Dayal found himself unable to focus on his evening meditation. Instead, he thought about the families now working under arrangements he had designed, about the gradual transformation of partnership into dependence, about the distance that had grown between his principles and his practices. How had a system intended to help struggling families become a structure that controlled their lives? How had his commitment to nonviolence accommodated an arrangement that violated people's dignity and independence? How had compassion become the justification for exploitation so gradual that he had not recognized its development? The questions multiplied in the darkness, each one revealing another dimension of the chasm that had opened between his intentions and their results, between the principles he taught and the system he had created to serve those principles. Rest here and breathe gently into this moment. Feel the simplicity of your breath moving in and out, asking nothing of you but awareness. There is no system to maintain, no complex arrangements to justify, simply the invitation to be present with what is happening right now, in this moment that asks only for your gentle attention. In the days that followed his troubling conversation with Govind, Dayal began to observe the monastery's daily operations with new eyes. What he saw disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Families who had once visited the monastery as friends and equals now approached with the deference of employees reporting to supervisors. Children who had once played freely in the courtyards now hurried past with downcast eyes, carrying tools to work sites where their parents labored under increasingly rigid schedules. The change was most visible during the monastery's morning prayers, when families working off their debts would gather in the back of the meditation hall. Where once they had participated as community members offering devotional practice, they now sat with the posture of people fulfilling obligations rather than seeking spiritual nourishment. Their presence felt dutiful rather than voluntary, marked by a weariness that spoke of too many hours spent in service to others' needs. Dayal tried to convince himself that these observations were colored by Govind's complaints, that he was seeing problems where none actually existed. The families were housed, fed when working on monastery projects, and allowed to remain on lands they could not otherwise afford. Surely this represented compassion in action, ahimsa expressed through practical support for those in need. But when he attempted to return to his teaching on nonviolence, the words felt hollow in his mouth. How could he speak of the interconnectedness of all life while managing a system that reduced people to units of labor? How could he teach about the importance of dignity and respect while treating families like resources to be allocated according to institutional needs? The contradiction became impossible to ignore during a teaching session with a group of visiting students from other monasteries. One young monk asked about the practical application of ahimsa in daily monastic life, seeking examples of how the principle of non-harm guided their community's decisions and relationships. Dayal began to speak about their care for insects and small animals, their gentle treatment of plants in the garden, their commitment to avoiding harsh speech or cruel punishment. But as he talked, he became increasingly aware of the group of families working just outside the windows, their voices audible as they organized another day's labor for the monastery's benefit. "Brother Dayal," the young monk continued, "how does this principle apply to the monastery's relationships with lay communities? How do you ensure that your interactions with local people reflect the same commitment to non-harm?" The question hung in the air like incense, impossible to ignore or deflect. Dayal found himself struggling to formulate a response that did not sound like the rationalizations he had offered to Govind, the bureaucratic justifications that prioritized institutional needs over individual dignity. We try to balance compassion with sustainability," he said finally, aware that his answer sounded more like a politician's evasion than a monk's teaching. Sometimes, serving the greater good requires difficult decisions about particular situations. But even as he spoke these words, Dayal recognized them as the language of compromise with principles rather than their faithful application. The greater good he referenced was primarily the monastery's welfare, and the difficult decisions involved other people bearing the cost of institutional comfort. After the teaching session ended and the visiting monks departed, Dayal walked alone through the monastery grounds, observing the activities his arrangements had set in motion. Near the construction site, where a new storage building was taking shape, he watched Govind's eldest son mixing mortar with the methodical precision of someone who had done this work countless times, though the boy was barely 16 and should have been learning agricultural skills from his father instead of masonry techniques for the monastery's benefit. At the vegetable gardens, he saw Govind's wife weeding rows of plants that would feed the monastic community, while her own family's plots received whatever attention remained after her obligations to the monastery were fulfilled. She worked with efficient speed, but her posture spoke of exhaustion, of someone pushing beyond natural limits to meet competing demands on her time and energy. These observations accumulated like stones in Dayal's chest, each one adding weight to a burden he had not realized he was carrying. The system he had created with compassionate intentions was functioning smoothly and serving the monastery's needs effectively, but it was also transforming free people into dependent laborers, converting partnership into servitude, replacing dignity with desperation so gradual that its victims had little choice but to accept each incremental loss of autonomy. That evening, as he sat in his cell attempting to focus on evening meditation, Dayal found his mind returning repeatedly to a teaching he had given just months earlier about the subtle forms that violence can take. He had spoken then about institutional harm, about systems that crush people slowly rather than quickly, about the way good intentions can become justifications for causing suffering when we lose sight of the human cost of our policies. At the time, he had been thinking primarily about government bureaucracies and commercial enterprises, never imagining that his own monastic community might develop practices that exemplified exactly the kind of subtle violence he had warned against. The irony was bitter and inescapable. In his effort to avoid the immediate violence of evicting struggling families from their lands, he had created a system of ongoing violence that controlled their lives, constrained their choices, and eroded their dignity, one obligation at a time. His commitment to ahimsa had been compromised not by a single dramatic failure, but by 1,000 small accommodations with exploitation. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams in which he wandered through endless corridors lined with people who reached toward him with expressions of need and dependency. In the dreams, he carried papers listing obligations and requirements, schedules and evaluations, all written in his own handwriting. When he tried to put the papers down, to walk away from the system they represented, the corridor filled with voices asking who would take care of the arrangements, who would manage the complex web of interdependencies his compassion had created. He woke before dawn with the understanding that confronting the system he had built would require the same kind of moral courage that had motivated its creation. But now the challenge was not avoiding harm to others. It was accepting responsibility for harm he had already caused and finding ways to repair relationships that his good intentions had damaged. The next morning, instead of beginning with his usual meditation practice, Dayal walked to Govind's small house near the edge of the monastery lands. He found the old farmer preparing for another day of work on monastery projects, organizing tools with the resigned efficiency of someone who had learned to manage competing obligations without hope of resolution. "Govind," Dayal said, settling himself on a simple wooden stool outside the farmer's door. "I have been thinking about our conversation, and I believe you were correct in your criticism of our arrangement." Govind looked surprised, perhaps even suspicious. In his experience, institutional representatives rarely acknowledged the validity of complaints from those they controlled. How so, brother? I created this system to avoid harming your family and others by forcing you off lands you could not afford to keep. But in trying to avoid one form of harm, I created another form that may be even more destructive because it is permanent and self-perpetuating. Dayal paused, struggling to find words for insights that challenged everything he had told himself about his motivations and their results. When I evict someone from land, the harm is immediate and obvious, but it is also complete. The person must find new arrangements, but they retain their dignity and freedom to make choices about their life. What I have created instead is ongoing harm that strips away dignity gradually while maintaining dependence indefinitely. Govind nodded slowly, recognizing in Dayal's words a description of his family's lived reality over the past months. The work itself is not the problem, brother. We have always labored, always contributed to our community's welfare. The problem is that we have lost the ability to refuse, to choose our priorities, to make decisions about our own lives. We work for the monastery, not because we choose to serve, but because we have no alternative. And that, Dayal said quietly, is a form of violence, even though I called it compassion and convinced myself it served the principle of non-harm. The admission felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing to begin. Dayal had built his identity around his commitment to ahimsa, and recognizing that this commitment had been compromised by gradual accommodations with exploitation challenged his understanding of himself and his practice. What would you suggest we do differently? He asked Govind, genuinely seeking guidance from someone whose perspective had been shaped by experiencing rather than designing the system they were discussing. Govind was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking carefully about how to respond to an invitation for honesty from someone who controlled many aspects of his family's survival. The old arrangements worked because they were simple and clear, he said finally. We paid what we could afford, and when we could not pay, we left. It was hard, but it was honest. Everyone understood the terms, and no one pretended that business relationships were acts of charity. He gestured toward the monastery buildings visible through the morning mist. What we have now is neither business nor charity. It is control disguised as kindness. You have made us dependent on your approval for our most basic needs, then convinced yourselves that this dependence is a gift rather than a burden. The description stung because it was accurate. Dayal had indeed transformed clear business relationships into complex dependencies, then justified the transformation as an expression of Buddhist compassion rather than acknowledging it as a form of institutional self-interest that served the monastery's needs more effectively than simple monetary arrangements. So, you would prefer to return to the old system, even if it means some families must leave their lands? I would prefer honest relationships that respect our dignity, even if they require us to face difficult circumstances. What we cannot afford, we should not keep. What we cannot pay for, we should not receive. These are simple principles that preserve everyone's integrity. Dayal understood that Govind was asking not for material comfort, but for the restoration of moral clarity in their relationship. The farmer preferred the clean pain of acknowledged limitation to the slow poison of disguised exploitation, even when that exploitation provided material benefits his family desperately needed. Over the following days, Dayal found himself studying the monastery's other relationships and policies with new attention to the gap between stated principles and actual practices. What he discovered was a pattern of similar accommodations, small compromises with ethical clarity that had accumulated into significant departures from the values the community claimed to embrace. The monastery's treatment of novice monks showed similar contradictions. While officially committed to gentle guidance and patient instruction, the actual training process had become increasingly demanding and rigid, justified as necessary preparation for monastic life, but functioning as a system of control that brooked little questioning or individual variation. Students who struggled with particular aspects of the training found themselves subject to additional requirements and closer supervision, rather than receiving adapted instruction suited to their learning styles. Those who expressed doubts about monastic life were not encouraged to explore these concerns honestly, but were instead subjected to intensified spiritual direction designed to overcome their resistance. Like the arrangements with farming families, these policies had developed gradually and with good intentions. The monastery's teachers genuinely wanted their students to succeed in monastic life, and the additional requirements were designed to provide extra support for those who needed it. But the cumulative effect was to create an institutional culture that prioritized conformity over authentic spiritual development, compliance over genuine understanding. Dial began to see how his commitment to non-violence had been compromised not by dramatic failures, but by subtle accommodations with systems that caused harm indirectly. He had focused so intently on avoiding obvious forms of cruelty that he had failed to notice the development of sophisticated forms of control that achieved similar results through more socially acceptable means. The insight was deeply unsettling because it suggested that his understanding of ahimsa had been shallow, focused on avoiding dramatic violations while accommodating systematic patterns of behavior that violated the principle's deeper implications. True nonviolence required not just avoiding direct harm, but examining the systems and relationships he participated in for their effects on human dignity and freedom. This realization led to another disturbing recognition. The monastery's growing reputation for compassionate treatment of local communities was built partly on policies that actually increased their dependence and control. Other monasteries had begun copying their arrangements with farming families, impressed by the apparent success of combining charitable intentions with practical institutional benefits. Dial's innovations were spreading throughout their religious network, multiplying the number of people subject to systems that disguised exploitation as compassion. His failure to recognize the ethical problems with his arrangements was contributing to the development of institutional practices that would affect many more communities than just their own local relationships. The weight of this understanding pressed down on him like a physical burden. Not only had he compromised his own commitment to nonviolence, but he had created templates for similar compromises that would ripple outward through religious communities that trusted his judgment and reputation. His influence as a teacher meant that his mistakes would be amplified far beyond their original context. Sleep became even more elusive as Dayal wrestled with the scope of repair work that authentic atonement would require. He would need to acknowledge the problems with current arrangements, work with affected families to develop more ethical alternatives, communicate with other monasteries that had adopted similar policies, and confront the institutional structures that had made such developments possible in the first place. But perhaps most challenging of all, he would need to examine his own motivations more honestly, to understand how someone genuinely committed to nonviolence could develop and defend systems that caused systematic harm to vulnerable people. The answer, when it came, was more disturbing than the recognition of the problems themselves. Dayal realized that his commitment to ahimsa had become abstract and intellectual, focused more on maintaining his identity as someone who practiced nonviolence than on actually preventing harm to others. When institutional needs conflicted with individual welfare, he had found ways to redefine harm rather than challenging the systems that caused it. This intellectual dishonesty had been possible because the people affected by his policies had little power to resist or complain effectively. Farming families dependent on monastery land could not afford to alienate their institutional landlords. Novice monks seeking religious training could not challenge their teachers' methods without risking their spiritual futures. In both cases, the power differential had made it possible for harmful practices to continue without effective opposition. Dial had unconsciously relied on this power imbalance to maintain policies that served institutional convenience, while telling himself stories about compassion and spiritual wisdom. He had become complicit in what amounted to systematic exploitation, enabled by the very religious authority that should have made him more sensitive to the ethical dimensions of his choices. The monastery's morning bell rang across the mountainside, calling the community to collective meditation. But Dayal remained in his cell, sitting with the weight of recognitions that had shattered his comfortable assumptions about his own moral clarity. For the first time in months, he felt ready to approach meditation practice honestly, without the burden of self-deception that had made genuine spiritual work impossible. But first, he needed to take concrete steps toward repairing the damage his good intentions had caused. The work would be difficult and costly for the monastery, and it would require him to admit publicly that his celebrated innovations in compassionate community relations had been based on fundamental misunderstandings of the principles they claimed to serve. This story shows us how even our most sincere commitments to ethical behavior can be corrupted when we lose sight of their true purpose. Dial discovered that non-violence is not simply about avoiding dramatic acts of cruelty, but about remaining vigilant against subtle systems that cause ongoing harm. Buddhism teaches that the path to enlightenment requires constant examination of our motivations and their results, never allowing good intentions to become excuses for harmful actions. When we prioritize our comfort over others' dignity, when we use spiritual principles to justify institutional convenience, when we mistake control for compassion, we become agents of the very suffering we claim to oppose. True ahimsa demands not just gentle intentions, but careful attention to the actual effects of our choices on those who have less power to resist or complain. Dial's journey reminds us that spiritual practice requires uncomfortable honesty about the gap between our ideals and our actions. When we discover that our behavior contradicts our values, wisdom calls us not to better rationalizations, but to better choices, not to more sophisticated justifications, but to genuine change. Let us pause here and breathe together. Feel the simplicity of breath moving through your body without manipulation or control. Notice how life sustains itself through processes that ask nothing of us but awareness and gratitude. In this moment, there is no system to maintain, no complex arrangements to justify, simply the invitation to be present with what is natural and true. Let us explore another story, one that reveals how the pursuit of spiritual achievement can become its own form of attachment, leading us away from the very freedom we seek. In a forest monastery, where ancient trees formed living pillars supporting a canopy that filtered sunlight into patterns of gold and green, there lived a monk named Arjun, whose dedication to meditation practice was legendary throughout their spiritual community. He could sit in perfect stillness for hours without the slightest movement, his breathing so subtle that observers sometimes wondered if he had entered states beyond ordinary consciousness. His posture remained erect and dignified even after days of continuous sitting, and his mind seemed capable of maintaining focused attention on meditative objects with a stability that other monks could only imagine achieving. Arjun had arrived at the monastery 15 years earlier, As a young man driven by an almost desperate hunger for spiritual realization, unlike many who came seeking escape from worldly problems or hoping to find meaning in religious community, Arjuna was motivated by a clear and specific goal. He wanted to achieve the deepest states of consciousness described in their tradition's most revered texts. He had read accounts of ancient masters who had attained levels of mental absorption so profound that they transcended all awareness of physical sensation, emotional fluctuation, and conceptual thought. These states, called jhanas in their tradition, were described as gateways to ultimate liberation, experiences of such perfect peace and clarity that those who achieved them were permanently transformed, freed from the ordinary patterns of craving and suffering that bound unenlightened beings to cycles of dissatisfaction. From his first day in the monastery, Arjuna had devoted himself to the methodical cultivation of these extraordinary states. While other monks balanced meditation with study, teaching, and community service, Arjuna focused almost exclusively on the intensive practice required to develop the profound levels of concentration that jhana states demanded. His daily schedule was rigorous beyond what most practitioners could sustain. He would rise at 3 a.m. and begin sitting meditation that continued with only brief interruptions for meals and necessary bodily functions until late evening. Even during community activities, group meditation sessions, dharma talks, work periods, his attention remained focused inward, maintaining the continuous awareness of meditative object that his teachers said was essential for achieving deeper states. This single-minded dedication had produced remarkable results. Within his first year at the monastery, Arjuna had developed the ability to maintain unwavering focus on his breath for hours at a time, experiencing states of mental calm and physical ease that most monks never approached. By his 3rd year, he was regularly entering what appeared to be the initial jhana states, experiencing periods when all sense of physical boundaries dissolved and his awareness merged completely with feelings of profound peace and joy. Other monks looked to Arjuna as an inspiration and model of what dedicated practice could achieve. His meditation reports during community meetings described experiences that seemed to confirm the most exalted descriptions in their spiritual literature. He spoke of consciousness expanding beyond all limitations, of awareness becoming as vast as sky, of peace so complete that the very concepts of problem and solution ceased to have meaning. The monastery's abbot, a wise teacher who had guided hundreds of students through various stages of spiritual development, watched Arjuna's progress with interest, but also with concerns he kept largely to himself. While admiring the young monk's discipline and apparent achievement, he noticed subtle signs that suggested Arjuna's relationship with his practice might be developing in problematic directions. There was an intensity in Arjuna's commitment that seemed to contain elements of attachment rather than the effortless flow that characterized mature spiritual practice. His descriptions of meditative states, while technically accurate, carried undertones of pride and possessiveness that seemed inconsistent with the selfless awareness those states were supposed to cultivate. Most troubling, the abbot observed that Arjuna's remarkable meditative abilities had not produced the natural compassion and wisdom that genuine jhana attainment was said to generate. Outside of his formal sitting practice, Arjuna remained self-absorbed and somewhat impatient with monastery activities that did not directly serve his spiritual goals. He showed little interest in teaching newer students, contributing to community welfare, or engaging in the philosophical discussions that helped monks integrate their meditative insights with daily life. When the abbot occasionally suggested that Arjuna might benefit from balancing his intensive sitting practice with other forms of spiritual development, the young monk would listen respectfully, but clearly had no intention of modifying his approach. He was convinced that he was on the verge of achieving the ultimate states, described in their tradition's most advanced teachings, and he saw any diversion from intensive meditation as an obstacle to reaching those goals. "Venerable Sir," he would say when pressed about the narrow focus of his practice, "the Buddha himself achieved enlightenment through intensive meditation, not through community service or philosophical study. The jhana states are the direct path to liberation, and everything else is merely preparation or distraction from that essential work." The abbot recognized the logical appeal of this argument while remaining concerned about its implications for Arjun's actual spiritual development. It was true that meditation was central to their tradition, and it was certainly possible that intense focus on contemplative practice could lead to genuine realization. But the abbot had also observed that the most realized teachers in their tradition combined meditative depth with wisdom, compassion, and practical engagement with the world's needs. Arjun's approach seemed to be producing technical mastery of meditative states without the corresponding development of the broader wisdom and compassion that those states were meant to facilitate. His achievement was impressive, but somehow incomplete, like learning to play musical instruments perfectly while remaining deaf to the music they could create. This became more apparent as Arjun's reputation spread beyond their monastery. Students from other communities began visiting specifically to learn from him, hoping to receive instruction from someone who had apparently achieved the advanced states they aspired to reach themselves. Arjun accepted these teaching responsibilities willingly, recognizing them as opportunities to share the techniques that had brought him such remarkable results. His instruction was precise and detailed, offering students systematic methods for developing the concentration and mental qualities that jhana practice required. But visitors who came expecting to learn from a realized master often left feeling somehow disappointed, though they struggled to articulate exactly what was missing from their interactions with him. His technical knowledge was unquestionable, his personal achievement appeared genuine, and his teaching methods were clearly effective for students who could sustain the intensive practice he recommended. Yet there was something in his manner, some quality of presence or being, that did not match their expectations of what someone with his level of attainment should embody. He seemed more like a skilled technician demonstrating advanced procedures than like a sage sharing wisdom born from profound realization. One visiting teacher, an elderly nun whose own practice had spanned 4 decades, spent several days observing Arjun's meditation and listening to his instruction before requesting a private conversation with the monastery's abbot. "This young monk has certainly developed remarkable concentration abilities," she said carefully, choosing her words with the diplomacy that experienced teachers learn when discussing sensitive matters. "His technical mastery is impressive, and I have no doubt that he is entering states that correspond to the jhana descriptions in our texts." The abbot nodded, sensing that more observation was coming. "But," the nun continued, "I am concerned about what appears to be missing from his realization. The states he describes sound correct, but they seem to be treated as possessions rather than as doorways to greater understanding. He speaks of achieving jhanas rather than of being transformed by what they reveal." This distinction captured something the abbot had sensed but struggled to articulate. Arjun's relationship with his meditative attainments did indeed seem proprietary, as though the states were trophies he had collected, rather than experiences that had fundamentally altered his understanding of reality. "In my experience," the nun went on, "genuine jhana practice dissolves the sense of self that achieves states, not strengthens it through accomplishment. Someone who has truly absorbed the lessons those states offer should be less attached to the experiences themselves, not more identified with having achieved them." After the visiting teacher departed, The abbot reflected on her observations and began paying closer attention to the subtle dynamics of Arjun's practice and teaching. What he noticed confirmed his growing concerns about the direction the young monk's spiritual development was taking. Despite his technical mastery and apparent depth of meditative experience, Arjun's practice seemed to be reinforcing rather than dissolving the very patterns of self-centeredness and achievement orientation that Buddhist practice was meant to transcend. His pursuit of advanced states had become a sophisticated form of spiritual materialism, accumulating impressive experiences rather than allowing those experiences to transform his fundamental understanding of self and reality. This became most apparent during community discussions about the purpose and meaning of their spiritual practice. While other monks spoke of meditation as a tool for developing wisdom and compassion, as a means of understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, including their own sense of separate selfhood, Arjun consistently framed practice in terms of achievement and attainment. He would describe his progress through various levels of concentration, his mastery of increasingly subtle meditative objects, his ability to maintain awareness in states that transcended ordinary consciousness. But he rarely spoke of how these experiences had changed his understanding of suffering, impermanence, or the illusory nature of the separate self that Buddhism taught was the root of all dissatisfaction. When pressed about the relationship between his meditative achievements and the development of wisdom or compassion, Arjun would respond that these qualities would naturally arise once he had completed his mastery of the jhana states. First, he argued, it was necessary to achieve the stable foundation of deep concentration. Only after that foundation was complete could the higher developments of enlightenment unfold. This sequential approach to spiritual development had logical appeal, but it also allowed Arjun to postpone indefinitely any examination of whether his intensive practice was actually producing the liberation it was meant to facilitate. By focusing exclusively on achieving higher states of concentration, he could avoid confronting the possibility that his relationship with those states was itself a form of attachment that prevented the very freedom he sought. The abbot began to suspect that Arjun's practice had become circular, using meditation to reinforce the sense of self that was the obstacle to genuine realization, achieving states that confirmed his identity as an accomplished practitioner, rather than revealing the emptiness of all identities, including his own. This concern deepened when Arjun began to show signs of competitiveness with other accomplished meditators. When visiting teachers described their own meditative experiences, he would listen with an evaluative attitude that seemed more concerned with comparing their attainments to his own than with learning from their insights. When students reported breakthrough experiences in their practice, his responses carried subtle undertones of judgment about whether their realizations matched the sophisticated states he had achieved. Most troubling, he began to express frustration with the monastery's approach to spiritual instruction, suggesting that their community was too focused on preliminary practices and not sufficiently oriented toward the advanced techniques required for achieving the deepest states. He implied that students would make faster progress if they could receive instruction from someone who had actually mastered the jhana levels, rather than from teachers who spoke about them primarily from textual study. These attitudes revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between meditative states and spiritual wisdom. Arjun had become so focused on the experiences themselves that he had lost sight of their purpose as means rather than ends, as tools for understanding rather than achievements to be accumulated. The jhana states were traditionally understood as temporary conditions that offered glimpses of the peace and freedom available when the mind was not caught in its usual patterns of craving and aversion. Their value lay not in the experiences themselves, but in what they revealed about the nature of consciousness and the possibility of liberation from the cycles of dissatisfaction that ordinarily dominated mental life. But for Arjuna, the states had become objects of desire rather than insights into the futility of desire. His ability to achieve them reinforced his sense of spiritual accomplishment rather than revealing the emptiness of all accomplishments. His mastery of advanced techniques became a source of identity rather than an opportunity to see through the illusion of separate selfhood. This transformation of means into ends, of tools into trophies, represented a subtle but profound corruption of spiritual practice. Arjuna was using the very methods designed to free him from attachment to create more sophisticated forms of bondage, employing techniques meant to dissolve the ego to construct a more impressive spiritual identity. The irony was particularly poignant because his technical achievement was genuine. He could indeed enter states of consciousness that corresponded to the traditional descriptions of jhana levels. His meditative ability was not fraudulent or imaginary, but represented real mastery of demanding mental disciplines. Yet this genuine accomplishment had somehow failed to produce the wisdom and freedom it was meant to generate. Instead of liberating him from the ordinary patterns of craving and self-centeredness, his advanced practice had given those patterns more subtle and seemingly spiritual forms of expression. This story reveals how spiritual practice itself can become a trap when we lose sight of its true purpose. Arjuna discovered that technical mastery of advanced techniques is not the same as genuine realization, that achieving impressive states can actually reinforce the very attachments practice is meant to dissolve. Buddhism teaches that the path to enlightenment is not about accumulating experiences or attaining special states, but about understanding the nature of mind and reality in ways that naturally free us from suffering. When we treat meditation as a means of spiritual achievement rather than as a tool for understanding, when we use advanced practices to build impressive identities rather than to see through the illusion of separate selfhood, we transform the very medicine that could heal us into a more sophisticated form of the disease we seek to cure. Arjuna's journey reminds us that the deepest wisdom lies not in what we can achieve, but in our ability to let go of the achiever, not in the states we can enter, but in understanding the awareness that remains constant through all states. True liberation comes not from collecting impressive experiences, but from recognizing the peace and freedom that are already present when we stop grasping for something more. Rest now in the simplicity of this moment. Feel how awareness itself needs no improvement, how peace is available right here without achieving any special states or accumulating any spiritual experiences. There is nothing to attain, nothing to master, nothing to add to what you already are. Simply be present with the natural awareness that is reading these words, breathing these breaths, resting in this eternal now. Let us turn to another story, one that explores how the desire to help others can become corrupted when we lose sight of their actual needs and focus instead on our own need to be needed. In a valley where a wide river meandered through fertile farmland, creating oxbow lakes and seasonal wetlands that supported both agriculture and abundant wildlife, there lived a healer named Priya, whose reputation for medical skill and compassionate care had spread throughout the entire region. People traveled for days to seek her treatment, bringing ailments that ranged from simple injuries to complex chronic conditions that other healers had been unable to help. Priya's knowledge had been acquired through decades of dedicated study and practice. She had learned the traditional healing arts from her grandmother, a woman whose understanding of herbal medicine and diagnostic techniques was legendary in their community. To this foundation, Priya had added knowledge gained from traveling healers, medical texts from distant lands, and careful observation of how different treatments affected various conditions over time. But perhaps more important than her technical knowledge was Priya's genuine compassion for those who sought her help. She could see past symptoms to the suffering they represented, understanding that physical ailments often reflected deeper imbalances in people's lives, relationships, and ways of being in the world. Her treatments addressed not just immediate medical needs, but the broader patterns that contributed to illness and prevented natural healing. People who came to Priya felt truly seen and understood in ways that went beyond their specific complaints. She would listen patiently to their descriptions of symptoms while also paying attention to their emotional state, their living conditions, their work patterns, and their relationships with family and community. This holistic approach often revealed connections that purely symptom-focused treatment would have missed. Her success in helping people who had found no relief elsewhere earned Priya deep gratitude and respect. Farmers whose chronic back pain had prevented them from working their fields returned to full productivity after her treatments. Women whose difficult pregnancies had been sources of fear and suffering delivered healthy children with her guidance. Children whose persistent illnesses had worried their parents recovered completely under her care. This success created a steady stream of patients that kept Priya busy from dawn until well past sunset most days. Her small clinic, built onto the side of her house, was constantly occupied by people seeking consultation, treatment, or follow-up care for ongoing conditions. The waiting area often overflowed with patients who had traveled long distances and were willing to wait hours or even days for the opportunity to see her. Priya took deep satisfaction in this work, finding meaning and purpose in her ability to relieve suffering and restore health to those who needed her help. Each successful treatment confirmed her sense of calling, her understanding that she had been given knowledge and abilities specifically to serve others' medical needs. But as her reputation grew and the demand for her services increased, Priya began to notice changes in both her practice and herself that concerned her. What had once been a natural flow of helping those who genuinely needed medical care was becoming something more complex and problematic. The most obvious change was in the nature of the conditions people brought to her. While she continued to see patients with serious ailments that clearly required professional medical attention, an increasing proportion of her consultations involved minor complaints, vague symptoms, or problems that seemed to resolve themselves shortly after treatment began. Some patients appeared to be seeking her services not because they were genuinely ill, but because being treated by the famous healer Priya had become a form of social status. Others seemed to use medical consultations as opportunities for attention and sympathy that they were not receiving in other areas of their lives. Initially, Priya tried to address this trend by being more selective about which cases she accepted, referring minor complaints to other healers in the region who were perfectly capable of providing appropriate treatment. But she discovered that many patients were not interested in seeing other practitioners. They specifically wanted treatment from her, regardless of whether their conditions required her particular expertise. This preference for her services over equally competent alternatives suggested that something beyond medical treatment was motivating their requests. People were seeking not just healing, but contact with someone they perceived as special, powerful, or somehow capable of providing benefits that extended beyond strictly medical care. Rather than recognizing this dynamic as a potential problem, Priya found herself flattered by the special regard in which people held her abilities. The steady stream of patients seeking her specific attention felt like validation of her skills and confirmation of her importance in their community. Being needed by so many people, being seen as uniquely capable of helping them, became a source of identity and self-worth that complemented her genuine desire to relieve suffering. This shift in motivation was subtle but significant. While Priya's conscious intention remained focused on helping others, unconsciously she had begun to need their neediness, to depend on their dependence, to derive satisfaction not just from successful treatments, but from being perceived as the only person capable of providing those treatments. The change became apparent in small ways that accumulated into larger patterns over time. When patients reported that they were feeling better and might not need continued treatment, Priya found herself suggesting additional consultations, just to be safe. When other healers in the region demonstrated success with cases similar to ones she treated, she felt competitive rather than pleased that more people were receiving help. Most revealing, when patients recovered completely and no longer needed her services, she experienced a subtle disappointment rather than the pure satisfaction that successful treatment should have provided. Their independence felt like a loss rather than an achievement. Their ability to maintain health without her ongoing involvement seemed to diminish rather than confirm her effectiveness as a healer. These responses puzzled Priya because they contradicted her understanding of herself as someone motivated purely by compassion for others' suffering. Why would she feel disappointed when people recovered? Why would she experience competitive feelings toward other healers who could help patients she was too busy to see? Why would she suggest unnecessary treatments when her stated goal was to restore people's natural capacity for health? The answers to these questions remained largely unconscious, hidden beneath her genuine desire to help and her obvious competence in providing medical care. But the underlying dynamic was gradually transforming her healing practice from a service to those in need into a system that served her own psychological needs for importance, specialness, and being indispensable to others. This transformation became more apparent as Priya's practice continued to expand beyond her ability to serve everyone who sought her help. Rather than establishing clear boundaries or training other healers to handle the overflow, she began accepting more and more patients, stretching her schedule beyond reasonable limits and compromising the quality of care she could provide to any individual. She told herself that turning away people who needed help would be heartless, that her skills were too valuable to withhold from anyone who might benefit from them. But the reality was more complicated. She had become addicted to being needed, unable to disappoint people who saw her as their salvation, unwilling to acknowledge that her desire to help had become entangled with her need to be seen as helpful. The consequences of this dynamic became visible in the declining health of both Priya and her patients. Working 18-hour days without adequate rest, she began to experience the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes from giving beyond one's sustainable capacity. Her own health, which should have been a model for those she treated, became compromised by the very patterns she warned her patients against. Inadequate sleep, poor nutrition, chronic stress, and neglect of her own need for renewal and balance. More troubling was the effect on her patients' long-term well-being. By making herself indispensable to their health management, by subtly discouraging their development of self-care skills and independence, she was creating relationships of dependency rather than empowerment. People who should have been learning to understand and care for their own bodies were instead becoming reliant on her ongoing intervention for problems they could have managed themselves. The most dramatic example of this pattern involved a middle-aged farmer named Ravi, who had initially consulted Priya about chronic headaches that were interfering with his work. The headaches were real and debilitating, but they were caused by tension patterns that could be addressed through relatively simple changes in posture, work habits, and stress management. Priya's initial treatment was effective and appropriate. She provided herbal remedies for immediate relief while teaching Ravi exercises and lifestyle modifications that would address the underlying causes of his tension. Within a few weeks, his headaches had largely disappeared, and he had learned techniques for managing stress before it accumulated into physical symptoms. But rather than celebrating the success and ending their treatment relationship, Priya suggested that Ravi continue with regular checkups to monitor his progress and prevent recurrence of the problem. What began as monthly consultations became weekly sessions, then twice-weekly meetings that seemed to focus less on his original headache complaint than on increasingly minor variations in his overall sense of well-being. Over time, Ravi became convinced that his health depended on these regular visits to Priya. When work or family obligations prevented him from keeping appointments, he would experience anxiety about what might be developing in his body without her careful monitoring. Normal fluctuations in energy, mood, or physical comfort became sources of concern that required professional consultation rather than natural variations he could manage through the self-care techniques she had originally taught him. Priya told herself that this ongoing relationship represented comprehensive care, that her continued involvement was preventing more serious health problems from developing. But the reality was that Ravi had become less capable of managing his own well-being, not more knowledgeable about his body's needs and responses. Her preventive care had made him dependent rather than empowered, fearful rather than confident about his ability to maintain health independently. This pattern repeated with many of her long-term patients. People who had originally sought help for specific conditions found themselves in ongoing treatment relationships that seemed to expand rather than resolve over time. Minor symptoms became chronic concerns requiring regular monitoring. Normal life stresses became medical issues needing professional intervention. Natural healing processes became dependent on her continued guidance and support. The irony was profound and troubling. Priya, whose genuine skill and compassion had initially empowered people to overcome serious health challenges, was now using those same abilities to create relationships that diminished rather than enhanced their capacity for independent wellness. Her need to be needed had corrupted the very healing work that had once been purely motivated by others' welfare. This corruption became most apparent during a conversation with another healer, an elderly woman named Kamala, who had known Priya since childhood and had watched her development from promising student to regional expert. Kamala visited Priya's clinic one afternoon, observing the constant flow of patients and the obvious strain that maintaining such a demanding practice was placing on her younger colleague. "You seem tired, child," Kamala observed as they shared tea during a brief break between appointments. "When did you last take time to rest properly, to restore your own energy reserves?" Priya laughed, though the sound carried more stress than humor. "How can I rest when so many people depend on me? Every day brings new patients who need help, existing patients who require follow-up care, complex cases that demand immediate attention. If I took time to rest, people would suffer." Kamala listened to this response with the careful attention of someone who had learned to hear not just words, but the assumptions underlying them. "And what would happen," she asked gently, "if these people had to seek help from other healers? Are there no other competent practitioners in this region?" "Of course there are other healers," Priya replied, though her tone suggested she didn't consider them adequate alternatives. "But they don't have the experience with complex cases that I've developed. They don't understand the sophisticated treatment approaches that really challenging conditions require." "I see," Kamala said quietly. So you believe that without your specific intervention, these people would not receive appropriate care? The question hung in the air like incense, carrying implications that Priya found difficult to examine directly. Put so plainly, her assumption that she was uniquely capable of helping her patients sounded arrogant, even delusional. But it was an assumption that had grown so gradually, supported by so much genuine success and grateful appreciation, that she had never questioned its validity. I just know that many of my patients have tried other treatments without success before coming to me, she said defensively. I see the relief in their faces when they finally find help that works. How can I turn away people who genuinely need what I can provide? Kamala nodded with the understanding of someone who had faced similar challenges in her own healing practice. There is great merit in helping those who truly need our skills, she agreed. But there is also wisdom in recognizing when our desire to help has become entangled with our need to be helpful. Sometimes the greatest service we can provide is teaching people to help themselves, even when that means they no longer need us. The conversation planted seeds of doubt that grew in Priya's mind over the following days. She began to observe her interactions with patients more carefully, paying attention not just to their medical needs, but to the subtle dynamics of dependency and empowerment in their relationships. What she noticed was disturbing. Many of her long-term patients had indeed become less capable of independent health management, not more skilled at caring for themselves. They looked to her for guidance about decisions they could easily make themselves, sought her approval for lifestyle choices that fell well within their own competence to evaluate, and expressed anxiety about minor symptoms they had once handled without professional consultation. More troubling, she realized that she was unconsciously encouraging this dependency through subtle communications that emphasized their need for her ongoing supervision rather than their growing capacity for self-care. When patients reported feeling better, she would focus on potential complications rather than celebrating their improvement. When they demonstrated understanding of self-care techniques, she would emphasize the importance of professional monitoring rather than their developing expertise. This pattern was not consciously manipulative. Priya genuinely believed she was providing comprehensive care that served her patients' best interests. But the cumulative effect was to keep people in treatment relationships longer than necessary, to make them more rather than less dependent on professional intervention, to transfer their confidence from their own body's wisdom to her external expertise. The recognition that her healing practice had become corrupted by her own psychological needs was deeply painful. It challenged not just her methods, but her understanding of herself as someone whose primary motivation was serving others. How could genuine compassion have become so entangled with the ego's need for importance and specialness? How could her desire to help have transformed into a need to be needed that actually harmed those she intended to serve? The answer, when it came, was both humbling and illuminating. Priya realized that she had confused being helpful with being indispensable, had mistaken her patient's gratitude for validation of her identity rather than appreciation for specific services rendered. Her sense of self-worth had become dependent on others' dependency, creating unconscious motivations that shaped her treatment decisions in ways she had never recognized. This insight forced her to confront a fundamental question about the nature of genuine service. True healing, she began to understand, aimed at making itself unnecessary. The most successful treatment was one that restored people's confidence in their own body's capacity for health, that taught them to recognize and respond to their own needs, that empowered them to maintain wellness independently, rather than creating ongoing dependence on professional intervention. But this understanding of healing as empowerment rather than dependency required her to let go of the psychological rewards she had been unconsciously seeking through her practice. It meant accepting that successful treatment would result in patients who no longer needed her, that true compassion might sometimes require disappointing people who sought ongoing attention rather than genuine healing. The work of transforming her practice from a system that served her need to be needed into one that truly served her patients' welfare would be challenging and uncomfortable. It would require her to examine every aspect of her treatment relationships, to distinguish between necessary medical intervention and unnecessary perpetuation of dependency, to find sources of meaning and identity that did not depend on others' continued neediness. But it would also offer the possibility of returning to the original impulse that had motivated her healing work, the simple desire to relieve suffering and restore people's natural capacity for health and well-being. This pure motivation, uncorrupted by ego's need for importance or specialness, could guide her toward treatment approaches that truly empowered those she served, rather than subtly undermining their confidence in their own wisdom and capabilities. Rest here and feel the breath moving naturally through your body. Notice how your heart beats without needing your management, how your body maintains itself through wisdom that requires no external expertise. In this moment, you are complete and whole, needing no improvement or intervention, simply breathing and being present with the natural intelligence that sustains all life. The process of transforming her healing practice began with Priya's decision to take the first real break she had allowed herself in over 3 years. Despite her patients' protests and her own anxiety about being unavailable, she arranged for other healers in the region to cover urgent cases and took 2 weeks for rest, reflection, and honest examination of what her work had become. During this time, away from the constant demands of her practice, Priya experienced withdrawal symptoms that surprised her with their intensity. She found herself restless and anxious without the steady stream of patients who needed her attention, uncertain about her value and identity when she was not actively engaged in helping others solve their problems. These feelings revealed the extent to which her sense of self-worth had become dependent on being indispensable to others. Without people needing her specific expertise, without the constant validation of grateful patients, she felt empty and purposeless in ways that had nothing to do with her genuine compassion for those who suffered. This recognition was painful but liberating. It helped her understand that the corruption of her healing practice had not been a conscious choice to manipulate or exploit others, but an unconscious attempt to meet her own psychological needs through her professional relationships. By becoming aware of these hidden motivations, she could begin to address them directly rather than allowing them to continue shaping her treatment decisions. When she returned to her practice after the 2-week break, Priya found that the world had not ended without her constant availability. The other healers who had covered for her had managed quite well, handling cases she had assumed required her specific expertise with competence and success. Several of her regular patients reported feeling proud of their ability to manage minor symptoms independently during her absence. Most revealing, some patients expressed that the brief interruption in their treatment relationships had helped them recognize their own growing knowledge and confidence in health management. Being temporarily separated from her ongoing guidance had reminded them of skills they possessed, but had not been using while relying on her direction. These observations confirmed Priya's growing understanding that her intensive involvement in her patients' health management had indeed been creating dependency rather than empowerment. By making herself constantly available, by taking responsibility for decisions they could make themselves, by focusing on potential problems rather than growing capabilities, she had been unconsciously undermining the very independence that genuine healing should restore. Armed with this awareness, Priya began experimenting with treatment approaches that emphasized patient education and empowerment over ongoing professional management. Instead of suggesting regular follow-up appointments for monitoring and prevention, she focused on teaching people to monitor their own progress and recognize when professional consultation was actually necessary. When patients sought guidance about minor symptoms or lifestyle decisions, she began responding with questions that encouraged them to trust their own judgment, rather than providing immediate answers that reinforced their dependency on her expertise. "What do you think your body is telling you?" became a more common response than detailed instructions about what they should do. This shift in approach was initially uncomfortable for both Priya and her patients. Many people had become accustomed to receiving specific directions rather than being encouraged to develop their own understanding. Some expressed frustration with her questions, preferring the security of clear instructions from someone they trusted over the uncertainty of making their own decisions. But gradually, those who persisted with this more empowering approach began to demonstrate growing confidence and competence in managing their own health. They learned to distinguish between symptoms that required professional attention and those that could be addressed through self-care techniques she had taught them. They became more attuned to their body's signals and more skilled at responding appropriately to changes in their physical or emotional state. Perhaps most importantly, they began to see Priya as a consultant and teacher, rather than as someone responsible for maintaining their health. This shift in relationship dynamics was subtle but profound. Instead of being dependent clients in an ongoing treatment relationship, they became empowered individuals who occasionally sought professional guidance for specific concerns while maintaining primary responsibility for their own well-being. The transformation was not without challenges. Some longtime patients resisted the change, preferring the security of dependent relationships over the responsibility of independent health management. A few sought out other healers who were willing to provide the ongoing attention and management that Priya was no longer offering. Initially, losing these patients felt like failure to Priya. Her ego interpreted their departure as rejection, as evidence that she was no longer providing the level of care they needed. But gradually, she came to understand that their choice to seek more dependent relationships was actually confirmation that her new approach was working correctly. She was no longer enabling dependency, and those who preferred dependent relationships were naturally selecting practitioners who would provide what they sought. The patients who remained with her modified practice reported greater satisfaction and confidence than they had experienced in their previous dependent relationships. They appreciated being treated as competent individuals, capable of making good decisions about their own bodies, rather than as problems requiring constant professional management. Their health outcomes improved as they became more attuned to their own needs and more skilled at responding to their body's signals. But perhaps the most significant change was in Priya herself. By releasing her need to be needed, by allowing her patients to develop independence rather than dependency, she found that her original compassion was returning in purer form. She could celebrate their recovery and independence without the subtle disappointment she had previously felt when successful treatment ended their need for her services. Her work became more sustainable as well. By teaching people to manage their own health rather than managing it for them, she was able to reduce her caseload to reasonable levels while serving the same number of people more effectively. Those who sought her consultation were generally dealing with genuine concerns that benefited from professional expertise rather than minor issues they could address independently. The quality of her treatment improved as her energy was restored through sustainable work patterns, and as her attention was focused on cases that truly required her specialized knowledge, she was able to provide deeper, more thoughtful care to fewer people, rather than superficial attention to overwhelming numbers of patients. Most importantly, she had learned to distinguish between genuine service and ego gratification, between healing that empowered and intervention that created dependency. This distinction allowed her to practice medicine in alignment with her deepest values, rather than in service to unconscious psychological needs that contradicted those values. The lesson was not that helping others was wrong or that professional expertise had no value. Rather, it was that the purest service focused on empowering those she helped rather than creating ongoing dependency on her assistance. True healing restored people's confidence in their own body's wisdom rather than transferring that confidence to external authorities. This story reveals how even our genuine desire to help others can be corrupted when it becomes entangled with our need for importance and specialness. Priya discovered that true service aims to make itself unnecessary, that the highest form of healing empowers people rather than creating dependency. Buddhism teaches that genuine compassion seeks to awaken others' inherent wisdom rather than making them reliant on our guidance. When we confuse being helpful with being indispensable, when we mistake others' gratitude for validation of our identity, when we unconsciously encourage dependency to meet our own psychological needs, we transform medicine into poison, service into subtle control, healing into harm. Priya's journey reminds us that the purest motivation for helping others arises when we have no hidden agenda for being needed, when our satisfaction comes from others' independence rather than their dependence, when we can celebrate their growing capacity to help themselves rather than feeling diminished by their reduced need for our intervention. Let us breathe together into this understanding. Feel how your body maintains itself through its own wisdom, how your heart beats and your breath flows without requiring external management. Rest in the knowledge that you already possess everything needed for your well-being, that others' expertise can support but never replace your own capacity for health and healing. Now, let us explore our final story, one that brings us full circle to examine how the accumulation of spiritual knowledge can become its own form of attachment, creating barriers to the simple presence that wisdom actually seeks to cultivate. In a center of learning where ancient texts lined walls like silent witnesses to centuries of accumulated wisdom, there lived a scholar named Vidya, whose mastery of Buddhist philosophy was unparalleled in her generation. She could recite entire sutras from memory, navigate the most complex doctrinal debates with elegant precision, and explain the subtle differences between various schools of thought with a clarity that made difficult concepts accessible to students at every level of understanding. Vidya had devoted her life to the study of the Buddha's teachings, spending decades immersed in texts that explored every aspect of the spiritual path. She knew the traditional commentaries, the historical developments of different interpretations, the philosophical arguments that had shaped Buddhist thought across cultures and centuries. Her personal library contained rare manuscripts that scholars from distant universities would travel great distances just to examine. This vast knowledge had made her a sought-after teacher and commentator. Students flocked to her lectures, eager to learn from someone who could illuminate the deepest mysteries of Buddhist doctrine with scholarly authority and intellectual rigor. Other academics consulted her on matters of textual interpretation and historical accuracy. Publishers competed to issue new editions of classical works annotated with her insights and commentary. But as Vidya's reputation for scholarly excellence grew, she began to notice a troubling gap between her intellectual understanding of Buddhist principles and her actual experience of the peace and freedom those principles were meant to cultivate. She could explain impermanence with perfect accuracy while clinging desperately to her own scholarly achievements. She could teach about non-attachment while being deeply attached to being recognized as the foremost authority on non-attachment. The irony became most apparent during meditation retreats, when the emphasis shifted from intellectual analysis to direct experience of the truths she had studied so extensively. Sitting in silence without texts to consult or students to impress, Vidya found her mind churning with knowledge that seemed to create more barriers than bridges to the simple presence that meditation invited. Her thoughts during sitting practice were filled not with awareness of the present moment, but with mental rehearsals of lectures she would give, refinements of arguments she was developing, and comparisons between her understanding and that of other scholars in her field. Even when she tried to focus on her breath, her attention would drift toward contemplating which textual passages best described the breathing process and how various meditation masters had approached similar practices. The knowledge that was supposed to support her spiritual development had somehow become an obstacle to the direct experience it was meant to facilitate. She had accumulated so much information about awakening that there was no space left for awakening itself to occur. This realization came gradually, emerging through countless small moments when she noticed her scholarly mind interfering with simple presence. During walking meditation, instead of feeling her feet touching the earth, she would find herself mentally cataloging different approaches to mindful movement described in various texts. During meals, rather than tasting her food with direct awareness, she would think about the Buddha's teachings on mindful eating and how they compared to instructions from other traditions. Most disturbing, when she attempted to teach meditation to her students, she would offer detailed explanations of technique drawn from multiple sources while demonstrating very little of the calm, present awareness that such techniques were designed to cultivate. Her instruction was technically perfect, but somehow lacked the quality of embodied wisdom that truly effective teaching required. Students began to notice this disconnect between her vast knowledge and her apparent level of realization. While they respected her intellectual authority, they sensed that something essential was missing from her presentation of the teachings, the transformative presence that authentic spiritual instruction carried. One student, after attending several of her meditation workshops, approached her with a question that cut to the heart of her dilemma. "Teacher," the young woman asked, "you know so much about all the different methods and approaches to meditation, but which one do you actually practice? Which technique has brought you the deepest realization?" The question revealed a painful truth Vidya had been avoiding. She had studied dozens of meditation systems, could explain their theoretical foundations and practical applications in sophisticated detail, but had never committed deeply enough to any single approach to experience its transformative potential. Her practice had become a form of spiritual window shopping, constantly sampling new methods but never allowing any of them to work their deeper magic. "I practice various approaches," she replied carefully, "depending on what seems most appropriate for different circumstances and students' needs." The answer was technically accurate, but profoundly evasive. The truth was that Vidya's practice had become so intellectualized, so focused on understanding rather than being, that it had lost the simplicity and commitment that genuine transformation required. That night, alone in her study surrounded by thousands of books about enlightenment, Vidya faced a recognition that shook her to her foundations. She had become a collector of spiritual knowledge rather than a practitioner of spiritual wisdom, an expert on awakening who had somehow managed to study her way out of the very awareness she claimed to seek. The path forward would require her to set aside much of what she knew in order to rediscover what she had forgotten, the simple capacity to be present without the mediation of concepts, analysis, or comparative understanding. She would need to become a beginner again, approaching practice with the fresh eyes of someone who had never read a single text about enlightenment. This story shows us how knowledge itself can become a prison when it replaces direct experience. Vidya discovered that studying awakening is not the same as awakening, that understanding concepts about presence can actually prevent presence from arising naturally. Buddhism teaches that wisdom emerges not from accumulating information, but from releasing our attachment to knowing, allowing awareness to rest in its own natural clarity. When we mistake the map for the territory, when we confuse descriptions of freedom with freedom itself, when we use spiritual knowledge to construct impressive identities rather than to dissolve the illusion of separate selfhood, we transform the very teachings meant to liberate us into more sophisticated forms of bondage. True wisdom is simple, immediate, always available right here in this moment that needs no explanation or enhancement. It arises not through accumulation, but through release, not through complexity, but through returning to the basic awareness that has been present all along. Take a gentle breath now. Feel how awareness itself requires no teaching, how presence needs no improvement, how this moment offers everything necessary for peace without any additional knowledge or understanding. Simply rest in what is already here, already whole, already complete. We have traveled far together tonight, exploring 10 teachings about the shadows that follow our choices. We met Veer, who discovered that the mountain's ore was endless, but his life was not. Learning that wealth without presence is merely beautiful imprisonment, we witnessed Akasha's recognition that avoiding difficult truths creates consequences far more devastating than the truths we fear to face. We walked with Dayal, who saw how even the most sincere commitment to non-violence can be corrupted when we lose sight of its true purpose, creating systems of subtle harm disguised as compassion. We sat with Arjun in his forest monastery, watching as spiritual achievement became its own form of attachment, leading away from the very freedom he sought. We observed Priya's journey from genuine healer to someone whose need to be needed transformed medicine into dependency, learning that true service aims to make itself unnecessary. And finally, we joined Vidya in her library of accumulated wisdom, discovering how knowledge itself can become a barrier to the direct experience it was meant to support. All of these teachings point to the same fundamental truth, that our deepest suffering often comes not from obvious failures, but from subtle corruptions of our highest aspirations. When we lose sight of our true purpose, even our most noble intentions can become sources of bondage rather than liberation. The path of wisdom requires constant vigilance, not against dramatic moral failures, but against the gradual drift that transforms medicine into poison, service into control, knowledge into ignorance, spiritual practice into ego enhancement. The Buddha taught that the very qualities that can lead to awakening, determination, compassion, knowledge, the desire to help others, can also become obstacles when they are corrupted by unconscious motivations or lose connection to their deeper purpose. In your own life, you may recognize these same patterns, the way good intentions can become rigid systems, how helping others can become a need to be needed, how spiritual practice can strengthen rather than dissolve the very ego it is meant to transcend. This recognition is not cause for despair, but for gentle honesty, not for harsh self-judgment, but for compassionate awareness of the human tendency to transform even our highest aspirations into more subtle forms of the patterns we seek to escape. The deepest teaching is also the simplest, that freedom lies not in perfecting our methods or accumulating impressive achievements, but in returning again and again to the basic awareness that is present right now, in this moment, asking nothing of us but recognition of what we already are. Let your shoulders soften now. Allow your jaw to release any tension it has been holding. Feel your breath moving naturally, easily, without need for improvement or management. Notice how your heart beats with its own wisdom, how life flows through you like a gentle river, requiring no effort or understanding on your part. There is nothing you need to become, nothing you need to achieve, nothing you need to accumulate or perfect. The awareness reading these words, breathing these breaths, resting in this moment, this is already complete, already free, already home. Your body knows how to rest without instruction. Your breath knows how to flow without guidance. Your awareness knows how to be present without technique or method. Simply allow what is natural to unfold, what is already peaceful to be recognized, what is already whole to rest in its own completion. Let everything soften. Let all effort dissolve. Let thoughts come and go like clouds across an open sky while you rest as the awareness that observes all changing experiences without being changed by any of them. You are already everything you have been seeking. You are already home. Simply be here. Simply rest. Simply let go. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.